Welcome everyone to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. This is episode 14. We just keep plugging along. With you today is your typical host, me, Ryan, and with me today again is Paul. Paul, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. We're at the time of recording this, we're about a week away from Christmas, so we're heading into the holiday season. It's in full swing, so it's always a fun time of the year.
Fantastic. Yeah, and do you have any special Christmas plans? Obviously, with the pandemic, I'm not expecting any traveling or whatnot, but you're lucky enough to live really close to your parents, and they I hope everyone's been safe and healthy.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's about it. We're just I'm getting together with my parents. I think my sister and her boyfriend are coming over because everybody in my family has been extra cautious. My sister and her boyfriend, I don't think, have left the house since March, other than to come to my parents' house. So they've just been getting everything delivered. And so yeah, we've all been pretty much staying in our little bubble. So yeah, just a small get together, but which is okay. So yeah, and that's about it. How about you?
Yeah, we've got to make the sacrifices. So I did do like a small Thanksgiving gathering at my grandma's. She's 92, and so time's ticking on. So we
Yeah,
had like
yeah.
a little bit of gathering. It wasn't the safest thing, but we did our best to be outside and wear masks and social distance, and so it was what it was. But this Christmas, I'm totally like opting out. It's just not worth it. On top of like with the weather in our area, it gets snowy and travel gets tough. So I'm just gonna, with all politeness, tell my family like I'm staying home. Like, love y'all, but well, we can talk on the phone or whatnot, and we're just around the corner from safer times. Obviously, not to get too far into just real world news here, as this is a video game focused podcast. But the vaccine's rolling out, so that's great. Our healthcare workers are getting vaccinated, and we'll see. Um, Hopefully, start seeing numbers go down in a lot of safer times ahead as that moves on. But yeah, I'm gonna kind of stay in. I do go grocery shopping, but I wear my mask at all appropriate times and even a little extra. Plus, my hygiene's always been really good. So staying safe, being careful, trying to wait it out just a few more months here. So that's all looking
Yeah.
good, and it's tell me let's have just a little more fun before we launch into the main topic today, which is tell me something you would put on your Christmas list this year, and feel free to have fun. You don't have to be practical if you don't want to, but you know
Ooh.
give me like one or two things you would put on your hypothetical Christmas list this year.
Well, let's see. Um, it's probably would be Ninja Turtles related.
Okay.
So the thing, well, we've talked about this a lot, and I know you offered to go in on it with me, but I still don't have that Turtles, the arcade machine that they made
Mm-hmm.
for home. I think it was Walmart that came out with it.
Yep.
I still don't have that, so that would be a nice thing for Christmas. That might
Mm-hmm.
be top
Mm-hmm.
of the list. Other than that, you know what else I would love? We'll keep it in the Ninja Turtles realm.
Okay.
I love those Ninja Turtles, those like NECA figures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those movie ones, they look so good. They're really expensive, but they look so good.
Yeah.
Like the detail, it's perfect. And I really just haven't gotten any because they are a little bit pricey in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but they do look good. So those two things, any of those figures, and then the arcade machine would probably have to be top of the list. I gotta stick in my Ninja Turtles world. So, what about you?
Very cool. Yeah, if I was to do a hypothetical list here, because as an adult, I'm lucky enough with my current financial stability that I can pretty much get myself whatever I want. But if I was to ask Santa to bring me something that I normally couldn't get a hold of in tough years, I'm gonna go super geeky, and I would say, if Santa was delivering it to me for free, I would want one of the new NVIDIA 30 series graphics cards. Because that'd be great to have, just to upgrade my PC and get some more graphic powerhouse. Because that's an expensive purchase. It's like buying a new console at this point. You're just
Hmm.
upgrading your PC. And I was lucky enough to get a PlayStation 5, as I discussed on the previous episode of the podcast, going through the PlayStation Direct pre-orders. So I've got
Yeah.
that covered. But I suppose if I was to say one more thing that I'd really enjoy, oh man, I'm gonna go super geeky as well because I was trying to think of something like physical, but I'm just not in that mindset. I haven't seen any like really cool physical tchotchkes that I'd like. And not that I'm not a fan of figures, but it's kind of I'm in a headspace where I'm like, I could get the figure, but I just kind of let it sit on my shelf. Whereas like with a
Yeah,
video game, it's like I get to actually play with my action figures. It's just that's kind of where my head's at with that.
that's true.
So I think if I could ask for Santa for one more thing, it would be to put into Smash Brothers. And I've said this before on episode 0. I would have Amaterasu from the Okami games added to Super Smash Brothers as the next DLC character. That would be my selfish wish there. That'd be my other
I
Christmas
love that.
present.
That's a good present having a character added to a video game. I like it.
Yeah, and touching a little bit on news, by the time this episode comes out, people will already be able to download Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII into Super Smash Brothers. He was announced during the Game Awards, and he is the first third-party villain, as well as the first DLC villain, to be added to Super Smash Brothers. So, a big deal for those for some gaming fans out there, including myself. It was completely unexpected. I thought it would, it could happen. Cloud's already in there, the main protagonist from Final Fantasy VII, but I didn't think it was guaranteed, and I've kind of given up on predicting. I just talk about, oh, I think this would be cool if this character was in there, and it was a nice surprise. So that's already there, and yeah, I would say my my one want would be Amaterasu of Okami. So yeah, those would be my Christmas presents to Santa and my completely hypothetical imaginary Christmas list.
I like it. So how is, not to get too far off topic, but
Sure.
how is the PS5 going so far, by the way?
So far, so good. It did go through a power outage where I was playing, and and power got cut, and I had to reboot it. It was a
Mhm.
little hairy on the restart, but it seemed to have come out just fine, and my hard drive wasn't crashed, my system didn't brick, and everything booted back up. No saves were lost. I lost like maybe 5 minutes of progress in the game I was playing, which was Spider-Man Miles Morales. But yeah, everything so far great. It's still an odd looking system, and I don't really appreciate that like laying it down horizontally requires the sand, but all overall it's nitpicks. I
Yeah,
think the system is a great improvement over what we have currently. I've
that's good.
been playing a lot of games that have 60 frames per second capability now, and that's great. For the few that don't, that's really disappointing, but hopefully they will be patched overall. And yeah, I don't have much else to say. I just keep getting more games. I've put a bunch of stuff on my rental list from GameFly to keep trying out new games and figure out whether or not I want to get them for PC or PS5. And I appreciate being able to try that. I'm thinking about maybe biting the bullet and getting PlayStation Now just so I could download a bunch of extra PlayStation 4 games, and I assume PlayStation 5 will eventually be added there as well. But we'll have to see how that goes and see if Sony takes the next step to make PlayStation Now more of a PlayStation Games Pass compared to Xbox
Hmm.
Games Pass.
Right. Yeah, cool. Well, I'm glad it's going well so far.
And to talk about what our actual topic is supposed to be today, as some viewers, returning listeners may have guessed, we're doing part 2 of our Resident Evil discussion today. So, following up from last time, where we kind of went through our history of the Resident Evil games and what we'd like to see remade and all sorts of stuff like that, and that was episode 12. You can go back and check that out. Today, we're going to follow up on two topics that we left off before. First will be what Paul suggested at the end of the episode, which was talking about our favorite characters from the Resident Evil series. And then after that will be what I want to talk about, which was since we're both big Code Veronica fans, we're going to talk about how we would remake Code Veronica and what would be like our dream aspects to what's important to us, what we want, what would need to be changed, etc., and just have a fun discussion there. We're not really going to talk about the TV shows or movies. We decided that since there was really no additional news about them, we're going to put that to the side and wait to see when they're out in future episodes. We might talk about them in the news and some brief reactions to whatever they show off. But we're probably going to save it for a separate episode where we've watched the new movie and the Netflix series, and then discuss our thoughts and feelings on how that turned out. So that's to address that. And then just to briefly touch on this because it's a kind of a dicey subject to talk about because unfortunately it could have hurt a lot of people, and that's there was the giant data breach at Capcom in which a lot of Capcom's marketing plans, both canceled and upcoming information, was released to the public by a group of hackers that tried to ransom the information. And the unfortunate part is that also they stole a bunch of Capcom employee information, and that's really unfortunate. But the Resident Evil part of that is it was through this unofficial hacking and data leak that Resident Evil is basically gonna be an annualized franchise. And while it already seemed like that with Resident Evil 2 remake, then Resident Evil 3 remake, and then Resident Evil 8 coming up in 2021, that they're already kind of annualizing it, but no, they're deliberately doing this. And Resident Evil 4 remake was kind of once again confirmed. Two more code-named projects for Resident Evil were revealed. We're not sure if Resident Evil Code Veronica, or at least I don't remember if from the news, was shown off. So we'll have to see how that turns out. Annualizing franchises is a dicey matter and could either oversaturate the market or could lower the quality of the games, or both. But we'll see. And the whole reason we're talking about today is we are fans of the series, so we're kind of like cautiously optimistic about what the future will be. So I don't know, Paul, if you had any additional thoughts on that before we get into the main topics.
Yeah, it is. Like you said, I mean, we'll see how it goes because it can go either way. I mean, if they're rushing games out just to put them out every year, just to say, oh, we need a new game this year, let's rush this out, the quality could suffer. But at the same time, it is nice to know that they're committed to continuing to put out new Resident Evil games and keep it a relevant franchise and stuff like that. So that's good news as a Resident Evil fan. I mean, I'm glad to see that they're keeping up with that, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully the quality will continue. And then yeah, I mean, like you said, as far as the data breach goes, it is unfortunate because I feel like I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that the part of the employees because I think some people do tend to forget that because a lot of times when these leaks or data breach happen, things it's like, oh, this information got leaked. Cool, we get this early information on Resident Evil, or this behind the scenes information. But you do have to remember that there is that employee stuff too, which is a shame that things like that, personal stuff like that, has to be leaked. So it's kind of a tricky area, kind of a gray area, if you will. So
Yeah. And while it's not 100% related, I will take a moment just to make a statement about a lot of developers a lot of different people work at these companies that make video games that we all love and care about, and throughout the world. And they don't deserve harassment. Oftentimes, a lot of the bad stuff that happens from video games, whether that's quality control or poor marketing decisions, like those things happen by those decisions are made by a select few, and then end up a lot of those developers who put a lot of hard work in and may have experienced crunch time or whatnot, like they end up being the brunt of this, and they're blamed as like a group when really only like maybe a handful of people actually did this, plus business pressures from investors and stuff like end up causing these bad decisions to get made that can compromise a product, that can put these people in compromising situations, and they get the undue harassment of the internet for quality and whatnot. And while, of course, it sucks when products are bad, or the quality's low, or things are released too soon, or promises aren't kept, we got to remember that there's still people, and that a lot of those people were just doing their jobs and just trying to do things correctly. The video game industry is not yet in a position where widespread unionization can occur, so the workers can fight for their rights on an equal playing field with all the big money at the top. So just a friendly reminder to people out there, like, hey, there's a bunch of people in video games that probably weren't responsible for the issues being there. So instead of maybe harassing them, maybe try to voice some more support. And I'm not saying necessarily like voting with your wallet or buying the right games, but at least being more polite on the internet and understanding that, like, just just like at your job, you're probably and Paul and I can speak to our previous jobs as well. Like, hey, sometimes you have good management, but even the bosses of our bosses are the ones who are passing down these crappy decisions, and a lot of people have to suffer, and it's just bureaucracy, and it's
yep.
you gotta be polite, and you gotta take it in stride, and you gotta also learn a little bit more information. So instead of maybe just complaining about how bad something happened to you, maybe fight for change instead. Try to have a little more empathy and sympathy. So Um, with that said, we're gonna shift to the empathy and sympathy we have for the characters of Resident Evil, or maybe lack thereof. So, Paul, why don't you start out and let me know, what were you thinking about some of your favorite characters? Where do you want to take this topic?
Well, I guess I'll just get started on some of my favorites. Yeah, I'll go with okay. So I would say my favorite character, if I had to pick one in the Resident Evil series, I think would be Claire.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think probably the reason for that, or one of the reasons, is because she's in Code Veronica slash Code Veronica X
Mm-hmm.
and Resident Evil 2, which are two of my favorite games. Those might be my top two games. So
Mm-hmm.
right there, that helps. I just think she's a cool character too. I loved her when she came back in Revelations 2.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really nice that they brought her back because she hadn't been in a game since Code Veronica X.
Yeah.
So that was nice. Yeah, I just like her as a character, and it's funny. One of the things I had been reading this a while ago. That's kind of cool if you think of Claire as a character. Is at least in the original games, she's the only one without any, I guess, like real training. For example, like in the first game, Jill and Chris, Barry, all of them, they're part of special forces, and then Leon in the second game is a cop
Right.
and stuff like that. So and then it's like, oh, Claire is just a girl. So and yet she still manages to be this like awesome character who could fight off zombies and go through go through all this stuff. So I thought that was kind of a cool point about her character, that despite not having any real training compared to everybody else, she could still be an awesome fighter. So I would say those reasons, probably the fact that she's in probably my two favorite games, the fact that she manages to be this awesome zombie fighter without having any real training. Those both help. I just think that she's a really good character. I like her. I like her demeanor. I guess she's kind of sweet. Maybe a little bit of a, I don't want to say an attitude. She's sweet, but she's tough at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Um, which is cool. So yeah, so I would say she'd be my number one. I can get into more. Like I guess what I wanted to do in addition to just my favorite, I wanted to go through some of my other top favorite characters. But first, I don't know. Do you want to give me your favorite, your all-time favorite, if you had to pick one?
Oh man. So I had to organize my thoughts a lot about this because when you posed the question last time, it was difficult for me to think about because I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not so much in love with the characters so much as I am like the whole situation of it. But then thinking about it, I have a lot of fond memories of specific character moments. And I think it
Hmm.
speaks to the difference that we have here in characters is because you haven't played Resident Evil 4 all the way through yet.
Right.
So if I had to, I suppose I would say my favorite character is Leon, especially because in Resident Evil 4, he is like pretty much the one playable character, and he has so many good action hero, like B movie action heroes, really good B movie action hero lines and stuff like that, and he's just characterized so well, and it's great to see that arc, and you see a similar arc, or you get to see a more complete arc actually with Claire, considering how far her time stretches. But I wanted to touch on like Claire is such a good character, and they really punched up her personality in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I'd like to touch a little more on in a bit. But with Leon, same thing. The way they show in Resident Evil 2 Remake, Leon is this like super goody two shoes, just a good guy trying to do the right thing in a tough situation, just going headstrong and maybe definitely a bit naive and a little too optimistic, but he's still like he's just trying to do the right thing. He believes in the good of people and is just
Hmm.
trying to be that good guy. And then there's like a bit of disillusionment that happens as he gets into Resident Evil 4 and he's been special forces trained and kind of like forced against his will to work for the government because they're like I think it's like in one of the Resident Evil 3 endings and plus extended lore that they're like they basically coerce him into staying with the government and he becomes a super special forces agent to fight like bioterrorist threats and do other things. He's a little tired of stuff when he gets into Resident Evil 4, but then his just attitude was like, "Yep, seen these things, dealt with monsters, like this is all crazy, but he just takes it in stride, and it's got the great one-liners. His characterization in Resident Evil 6, like Resident Evil 6 is one of the weird ones, but he's also kind of more tired. He doesn't actually develop too much more, but it is funny because he does have like this obsession slash like conflicted love interest with Ada Wong,
Yeah, it's
and
weird.
it gets weird there because it's like he understands that she's not necessarily the best person, but he like always trusts her because she, as selfish as a person she does basically look out for Leon, and like it hasn't let him die even when it was in the best interest of her mission.
Hmm.
So all of that, I almost want to say Ada Wong because she's just probably the most interesting and mysterious character in the series for who she works for and when she shows up and whatnot. But I think ultimately she hasn't been in enough stuff, and we haven't got enough information on her to really dive into whether or not I like her. But she kind of hits in that middle spectrum where you've got your heroes and your villains, and you like them for two different reasons, but it's essentially charisma. So yeah, I think I have to kind of cheap out and say like Leon is my all-time favorite, but Ada might be a close second, and I've got some strong feelings about some strong positive feelings about a bunch of other the hero characters as well as the villains and what I enjoy. But I imagine we'll get a little more into that in a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say with Ada, I was thinking we could also do a list of our favorite kind of side characters. Like Ada. I mean, I know she's a playable character in six, but for the most part, she's kind of more. She's not necessarily a main character compared to some of the others. So I was thinking because like you said, she's not maybe in it enough to rank her the way you rank Leon. But yeah, I was thinking we could also do some of our favorite kind of side characters as well, or characters who aren't as much to the forefront as a Leon or a Claire are.
Right, right. And it's also I think funny that we both like said like Leon and Claire, and Resident Evil 2 was like, I guess it's the second most popular at this point overall. Like Resident Evil 4, it's like tied between 2 and 4 for
Yeah, I
the
think.
fandom, but
Yeah, most lists that I've seen that rank Resident Evil games generally have two or four at the top. Those are usually
yeah.
as far as people's favorites or people what they consider to be the best games. Usually, those two are generally up there. So yeah, I guess that does kind of make sense.
But besides like the gameplay, because that's where it kind of goes back and forth. Because like 2 felt dated once 4 was out, but then 4 is kind of not necessarily traditional Resident Evil, and now we've got Remake 2, which was so good, so it kind of goes back, and now it's debatable which one's actually like they're both excellent games. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think it says like it shows something that these two characters were introduced in this phenomenal entry that has held up over time. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost unfair because they've been so soon, but I think it's also interesting how like Chris, Jill, Barry, and some of the other characters from Resident Evil 1 kind of haven't held up as well. But once again, I plan on expanding on that because there is
Yeah.
more to talk about there with a little bit of nuance, but it's ultimately very positive. So
Yeah, and I wanted to touch a little bit on your points about Leon because I would say Leon's up there for me as well as a character, and I think your point is good about his growth. I guess
mhm,
because yeah, in Resident Evil 2, he's a rookie. He's a rookie cop. His first day on the job, like you said, he's kind of naive. He doesn't, he just thinks. I think going into that situation, he just kind of there wasn't really a gray area for him. It was just like
mhm,
good versus bad. Like, hey, I'm a cop. I'm doing the right thing. I'm for the good side, and then there's the bad side, and I think as the game went on, things kind of got blurred with him, specifically with Ada, because he immediately fell in love with Ada within like 10 minutes of knowing her,
yeah,
uh, and then she was kind of. It turned out that she wasn't who she said she was, or she was kind of working for the other side, or she had her own agenda, I guess, if you will.
yeah,
But then in the end, she didn't kill him. When there was all that kind of storyline, so I feel like that kind of partially made him. I don't know. I guess change his way of thinking because now it's like, oh, you have this Ada girl that I loved and I trusted and I helped, but then she turned out not necessarily to be a good person. But then she kind of was a good person. Like I think that kind of made him conflicted. And then, like you said, by
yeah,
four, and by six, he's he's a little bit more weathered, I guess, a little bit more experienced.
Yeah,
He doesn't he's not that that rookie, inexperienced, naive character anymore.
fights a village full of infected psychos, and they
Yeah.
they hear a bell, and he goes, "Where's everybody going? We can go." Never gonna forget that line. And that's among like probably the weakest of the best lines in that
Hmm.
game, but it's such a tone setter.
But yeah, so that I think the fact that he has that growth is really cool, and you could see, and back to Claire as well. For mine, you can see that a little bit with her as well, because in Resident Evil 2, she kind of goes along with Leon as far as she's also naive. Like, she's just a kid. I don't know how old she's supposed to be in that game. I always thought maybe like 16, 17, 18. I know she's really young.
In remake
Um,
too, she's clearly a college student. So she's
okay, yeah,
like
that
eight.
makes
I'd say she's
sense.
like 18, 19, maybe 20.
That makes sense. So yeah, so again, she's also very young, very naive. She's just looking for her brother. But like I said, she holds her own, despite being this young
Yeah.
girl who doesn't have much training. She holds her own.
I think
You know,
I
she
think
does
the
really well.
lore, because Chris was a military, joined the military, and like their parents were dead, and so they were raised together. So I think the lore is that like Chris did pass on some of his military training to Claire, like for self-defense and stuff, as a way to
That
just
makes
like
sense.
help
So she had a
protect
little bit
her.
of experience.
So she has a
Yeah,
little bit,
right.
but she is not like, yeah, she's not like a classically
Not
trained. She was,
official, but
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
which helps, but it's still cool.
right. So she's that in one that, goes along with Leon as far as being young, inexperienced, naive.
Hmm.
And then by Code Veronica, she's kind of evolved a little bit. Like, you see her at the beginning when she's at Umbrella headquarters, or wherever it
Oh
is,
yeah,
and yeah, so she's getting, she's I guess she's kind of
dodging
growing there
helicopter
as far
fire.
as yeah, exactly. She's become this ultimate fighter, and then you shift all the way to Revelations 2 when she finally becomes a playable character again, and she's older. I loved her in Revelations 2. I felt like she was very mature by
Hmm.
that game. I thought her dynamic with Moira worked really well, and she was just like, I felt like she's like older Claire now. She's not messing around. She's not taking anything from anybody, and so I feel like I don't know if she quite had the same growth as Leon, but I feel like she has evolved as a character as well.
I think I like Claire's growth better over Leon, but that's because Leon I think was underserved in Resident Evil 6, which was his third
True.
like starring entry, whereas Claire had two, then Code Veronica, then Revelations 2, and I think I completely agree with you on Revelations 2 with her characterization, and I really like it because it's funny. She's she gets captured and taken into the thing, and she like of course is a little bit frightened, but when she wakes up alive, she kind of like gets into the here we go again kind
Yeah,
of
it's kind
motions.
of
And then she's got Moira
right.
with her, so she's trying to be strong, and she reassumes that role as like this big sister energy. And she's kind of been through this twice, and technically the one CG movie where her and Leon are in there, which is around the same time as like Resident Evil 4ish, so that she has a little more experience at that time as well, is supposed to have kind of factored into her character a bit, but it's I don't think it's, even though, yeah, I think the group she's a part of in Revelations 2 is originally mentioned in that CG movie, and I don't know the title. I want to say it's like Degeneration, but I'm probably messing it up there.
Well, and what I like about her in Revelations 2 as well is the whole story in that of her story with Moira is that, they got implanted with this virus where
Hmm.
it's, it plays on fear. Like, if you reach a certain level, what is it? If your heart rate, I can't remember,
Yeah, it's certain
reaches a
fear
certain level,
level, and
yeah,
yeah, and
the
then
virus will
triggers the
take you
virus.
over. And even some of those other people who, those military trained people that they're with, you know,
Yeah.
can't overcome it. And whereas Claire's just kind of like, yep. I mean, she's afraid, but she doesn't let it show. I guess she's been there before. She's played the game before, so
Yeah.
she doesn't quite let it get to her as much.
So I quickly Googled it. Yes, I was luckily right. Resident Evil Degeneration was the 2008 CG movie created by Capcom that had Claire
Hmm.
Redfield and Leon meet up, and I think it takes place either shortly after or shortly before Resident Evil 4,
I'll
because
have
Leon
to look
is,
that up.
yeah, no, they're fun watch. I haven't watched
Yeah, I don't remember that at
the
all.
second one, but I watched the Degeneration and I watched the third one, which has Leon, Chris, and Rebecca, and that's Rebecca's next technically canon appearance since Resident Evil 1. So,
Okay. Cool.
and one of the random alternate endings you could get in original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
Oh,
So,
nice.
so yeah, with Claire,
Um.
and I wanted to touch more on, a little on Revelations 2 with her, like she reassumes that big sister energy, but she gets to, it's like older because Moira's like 18, so,
Right.
and Claire's like probably, if not in her 30s, like close to it.
Gotta be.
Um,
Yeah.
so she's like mentoring Moira, but she doesn't necessarily. It's not like dealing with Sherry when Sherry was like an 8-year-old, and
Right.
so she gets that. And then when, what was the little girl's name in Rev 2? I was really bad with names and I had to
It
think of
was
everything.
Natalia, I think.
Natalia. So when she sees Natalia, she immediately tries to shift back into that role of when she met Sherry from Resident Evil 2. But
Right.
she's like way over anxious and she's like talking really fast to try and calm her down, but failing. And then Moira's like, take a break here. Because Moira's also a sister. She's Moira's one of Barry's daughters, and
Yeah.
she has a sister who's, I believe Moira is the older of the two. So she's like, no, no, Claire, take a step back. I don't know why you're so being weird about this. And it's like, hey, calm down. And then that Moira kind of steps into the old Claire's shoes, but with that like more modern teenage attitude, because she didn't grow up with the military discipline. She grew up with actual parents, and so she was given a little more security and freedom than what like Claire had to grow up with
Right.
with her and Chris being orphans. So
um.
that, I thought that was really funny, and also seeing like Claire deal with that, and Moira also kind of having to grow with that as well, and those relations. So yeah, it was really fun. And then of course, like at the end of Revelations 2, she survives the island, and then they rescue her and she's okay, and then she comes back and she's got that new haircut and she's got that new outfit, which while still harkening back to that feel from her Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica looks, like the 90s biker attire that she's kind of
Right.
got. But then she shows up, she's on a helicopter, she's got the sniper rifle, and she's helping Barry, and it's just like,
Yeah.
she's just immediately cool again. It's like, oh, there we go. This is great.
Yeah, so all right, so Claire and Leon would be our favorites,
Yeah.
uh respectively. So now let's go through. I'll get started. I'll just go through some of my other favorite characters,
Hmm. Hmm.
both main characters and side characters, like we talked about, and then maybe after that, once we go through our favorites, maybe we could get in a little bit to some of our least favorite characters.
Okay.
So my other favorites, well, I know you mentioned they don't hold up necessarily as well, but I do have to put Jill up there only because the original Resident Evil was the first Resident Evil game I ever played,
Hmm.
and we played as Jill the first time. We didn't play as Chris, so
Yeah.
Jill holds a special place in my heart just because she was the first character of the first Resident Evil game I ever played. So it's tough for me not to put Jill up there. Although, since then, like you said, I liked 3, but I didn't love 3. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. It's definitely my least favorite
And
of
you're
those
talking about the
original.
original because you haven't
The
played
original
remake
3,
yet.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
It's definitely my least favorite of those original games, and Jill is obviously the main character in that. And I also didn't care for 5, which Jill is in as well.
Yeah.
So there's that, but it's tough for me not to hold her up there as one of my favorites because of playing as her in 1. So she'd be another one. As a side character, I love Barry, love him. I mean,
Hmm.
he's obviously, it's well documented for any Resident Evil fans that his lines in the original Resident Evil are about as cringeworthy as could be. But
Hmm.
there's something special about it. They're almost so bad that they're good at this point.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I always liked him playing that game because he always kind of helped you, but you could tell there was something shady going on. Like he would help you, but it's like, oh, Barry, what are you doing here? Oh, I had something to look at this side of the map. Like you could tell there was something going on, and then it was revealed that he was working with Wesker, but it was because Wesker had his family holding up his family or whatever, and then in the end he decided to help Jill anyway. So I always thought he was
Yeah.
this kind of heroic character, and I was always disappointed that they didn't do much with him after that. Like he was totally absent from the games
Mm.
other than a couple mentions until Revelations 2. Getting back to that, I loved that he was a playable character in Revelations 2. I thought that was
Yeah.
so great that they finally made him a playable character. So yeah, I like Barry. Just he's great. You gotta love him. It's tough not to love his cheesiness and stuff like that. So he's another one. Sticking with Revelations 2, I thought Moira was a great character. I liked that we got to some development on Barry's daughter because like I said in the first game, you hear about his family. And obviously she's super young in that game, but it was nice that you got to play as her. And I liked that as kind of just that secondary character. She was still helpful. Like if you're playing as Moira, you could still she had that crowbar you could hit enemies with, or
Right.
she could blind them with the flashlight, which would allow Claire to give Claire some extra time to hit and melee them or whatever. So but I liked her. She had some really funny lines too, if I remember. She swore a lot, and she,
Yep.
she just had a lot of like funny stuff to say. I just remember laughing at like a lot of her dialogue in a good way. So she'd be up there. Let's see. I got a couple more. I don't want to go on for too long, but
For sure.
I would agree with you on Ada. I like her as a character because she is kind of conflicted, where she has her own agenda, but she clearly likes Leon, and she definitely always seems to be conflicted as like, well, I need to do this, but Leon's a good guy, and I don't want to like disappoint him, I guess. So,
Hmm.
and yeah, she's just a cool character in general. I think I like Sherry Birkin. I think we talked about it a little bit last time. Obviously, and she's really young in the first one. That there's not too much to her. I'm sorry, in Resident Evil 2, she's really young. And there's not much to her character, but I thought, and I think we both agreed that she was one of the bright spots, if not the bright spot, of Resident Evil 6. I really enjoyed her character in that game. I wish they would have expanded on that, and maybe they will do a little bit more with her.
Hmm.
So she'd be another one. Let me think. That might be it from now off the top of my head of just my all-time favorites. I might have some more, especially if you name some, it might bring back some memories. But of my top characters, those are all the ones that I could think of right away. So I'd be curious to hear yours as well, and then maybe when you're done, we could talk a little bit about our least favorite characters.
Okay. I also do want to throw back to also like favorite villains.
Oh, good point. Yeah, yeah.
So I'll talk about my heroes there, give you some time to think about like what villains and so with when it comes to like the protagonists, I agree with a lot of the picks that you have. I think just kind of looking at trying to put some of the thoughts in perspective. Like Resident Evil 1, the characters are so fresh. Like even talking
Hmm.
remake, because I'm going to focus on remake because that is kind of the definitive new start for Resident Evil, and that's they're just experiencing this for the first time. You've got the initial like Wesker is blackmailing Barry. Jill and Chris are just trying to figure things out. They really don't know. They're classically trained for like real world military operations, but this is a wholly unusual thing. Resident Evil is very much like they're almost silent protagonists, but of course they speak in like cutscenes and things like that. But they're not constantly chattering. You get little bits of dialogue here when they're examining stuff, but they don't really get too much room to characterize themselves. They're very much just kind of like I want to say like do-gooder, but that's not like good enough. They're just kind of stand up like normal professional people in this crazy situation, and you see them kind of losing their composure because it's the first time they're experiencing these crazy things, but they still pull it off. So it's like we didn't get much time with them, and it's everything after that really allows them because now it's like okay, been there, done that, and they have a little more perspective and a little more confidence in the situation, and that's what we see like from everything onwards from like 3 and beyond. So that's where like
Hmm.
with Jill, I wouldn't have said much about her other than I think Jill's cool and she deserves more. Oh, that's right, because she was in Resident Evil 5. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, but she was in Resident Evil 5, and unfortunately, like she was definitely a good go-getter from the cutscenes we got, and her and Chris were both super confident. She was in Revelations 1, and she did have much more there, but she was very much like a straightforward, no nonsense kind of person in Revelations 1, and it was nice to see that she did get more respect because she is very skilled as a combatant. They give her more abilities. Like they tried to give her more abilities in original RE3 with like the dodge mechanic and things like that. And then that's brought over both into Revelations and into Remake 3. So with Remake 3 though, they really wrote a lot more character into her, and she kind of gets the same treatment as like Claire, and even Claire's new writing is kind of taken from the lessons they learned from the writing that resonated with people in Resident Evil 4, and so they're given a lot more like punchy lines. So definitely based on remake three's portrayal of Jill, she's definitely bumped up there to like one of my top characters. And
Nice.
so,
Okay.
so I'm happy to say that. Barry's great, and I think Barry, it's Revelations 2 that really does it because Barry shows up. He's like the most armed character. He's like, I gotta go there. I
Yeah.
gotta save my daughter.
He's not
Don't
messing around.
He's not
Yeah.
messing around. He shows up with a bunch. He's got his Magnum. He's got a machine gun, and he's got his I think a sniper rifle as well,
Yeah,
or
he's
something.
got all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff. He's
He like
ready.
shows up. He's good, and then of course he has to switch into dad mode when he sees Natalia, and he's like, oh
Hmm.
man. And originally he's like, stay on the boat, and she's like, no, I don't want to stay on the boat. And he's like, he hates it, but he's like, yeah, you know what? Fine, whatever. And of course, it ends up working out like gameplay wise because she can like see some of the invisible monsters and things like that, and she could see and hear enemies through walls and things like that. So that it becomes a helpful partnership as well. And then of course, Barry gets his awesome, super cheesy B-star movie moment at the very end when he's like, when the final monster, and he's just like ready to do it, and he gets like that slow mo intro scene there with Claire behind him in the helicopter, and he's just like, I'm taking her out, and just like, yeah, it's great, and he just gets the same treatment. He's like, I got a job to do. It's, it's so yeah. I think they for only being playable once, and definitely I think at this point like criminally low screen time, but it also makes sense. Like he was a family man, and he got blackmailed, and of course it makes sense that it's like this happened. I can't let my family get in danger again. I'm just completely bowing out. Like we're gonna go live a quiet life and stay out of it. And then he just has to go back because it becomes personal again because Moira gets involved. So he's like, nope, got to step out of retirement, going for broke here. So in a plot way, that makes sense. Sherry, I agree with you. Once again, she does get more characterization, but I think we definitely she deserved a better game, and I think that's another thing there where hopefully in the future because they aged her up into like her early 20s, so she
Yep.
could maybe we can make her the new Claire because Claire will get to her 40s and 50s and she might want to also like plot wise they might say like she wants to step back a little bit, but we'll see how any of that goes. And then for like side characters that are there like I thought Sheva was great for Resident Evil 5. It's once again she just didn't get enough focus and screen time. So I'd love to see her come back as a character. And who else on the hero side? Oh yes, and once again, going back to Resident Evil 3, because with Resident Evil 2, Claire and Leon were rewritten and they're so well done. And Claire, of course, like I got to give a shout out to when Claire goes to fight the second to last boss. It's Birkin level 3 where he's got the four arms and stuff and
Hmm.
he tells Annette to just go take care of Sherry, and she jumps down. And she's like, "Oh, I got it." Oh, Annette's like, "You have no idea what you're in for," and she's like, "I have an idea," and she's like, "I got this," and just jumps down into the like she jumps down in. She's not like Leon who just like gets unwittingly trapped into the lowering platform. She is up
Hmm.
there with Annette on the same level, and then she's like, "No, no, you, Annette, go take care of your daughter. I got this guy," and she just jumps down. And I'm just like, "Oh my god!" Like she is just set and so cool. And then they
She's
kind of did the same thing for Jill in Remake 3. Sorry, what were you gonna
oh,
say?
okay. This is kind of changing topic, but I wanted to bring it up while you were on this portion of the game. I thought it was interesting how they kind of made they really changed Annette's character. She was more of like more of a good guy, I guess, or a good person compared to in the original two. She's clearly just a villain, no doubt
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like no ifs, ands, or buts. But she was. I felt like out of everything they changed up in the remake, they really changed her character up. I just wanted to bring that up now. Well, before I forgot while you were
Yes,
talking about
yeah.
that.
In Resident Evil 2, it's yeah, everyone's written way better for the most part. They touch up Annette a lot more. They show that relationship between her and Sherry to build that emotional thing to try and hit that emotional beat at the end when Annette ultimately makes the sacrifice because she's like a selfish scientist, but she does care for her daughter like a mother. But she knows that her work and she's now messed up a huge thing, and Sherry's kind of more of an annoyance at this point because at the time city's falling apart. But
Hmm.
when push comes to shove and she's trying to make like, you know what, I'm trying to save the city, I have to sacrifice my daughter, but she's like, you know what, no, my daughter's the most important thing. Yeah, I agree with you. She's completely written so much better, and that's what we kind of see as time goes on, where they kind of hit a stride with the writing. So yeah, Jill gets a lot better. They completely rewrote Carlos. Like they kept the spirit of Carlos, kind of trying to be like this like macho tough guy, but with an air
Hmm.
of charm, and they do that so much better now. And he becomes now one of my like a great character, and I'd love to see him in a future game as well with that actor in the new rendition of Carlos. It'd be great to have him come back as well. And a number of these characters that have been touched up would be fantastic. As for any other heroes, going back through, I mean, most of the other Revelations cast is nothing. Oh yeah, this is kind of stretching things because with Resident Evil 7, Ethan's kind of nothing to write home about. Mia, no.
Yeah.
Zoe's kind of okay, but like she's so background. Like I don't think
Right.
they do
Yeah, you
enough
don't even
for
see
her,
her
even
for
in the
a while.
DLC.
Yeah. Hmm.
But if I had to say like protagonist wise in there, like they do the second DLC where they introduce Joe Baker, who's Jack's brother, and he's just living out in the bayou, like hunting gators and stuff, and just making a living off of that. And he has to go do the final mission. He's just punching dudes. Like he was such a cool character to add, and it's such a brief experience. And he's not exactly like anything too. He's kind of special for Resident Evil because he's just so like no nonsense old Southern boy, just like I'm going to beat these monsters up and I gotta save my family. Like he's just
Right.
he's one note, but he's the best one note. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So so I want to give a shout out to him, and that's about it for that. Oh, and one more special shout out to Piers, who was Chris's partner in Resident Evil 6,
All
because
right.
he does go through the campaign. He's a better character than Chris at this point, though. I don't hate Chris's arc where he's like kind of coming disillusioned because Bioterror just keeps going on and people keep dying around him, and he gets survivor's guilt and all. Like it makes sense, but it just
Yeah.
it's also like Chris never really does anything too interesting. Everything else around him, and I think in a way that's kind of the thing. He's like the anchor point for a lot of characters to bounce off of. But Piers trying to bring Chris back into the fold, trying to keep him like come on man, you're the commander, you're the boss, like you can do this. And Piers automatically like or not automatically, ultimately sacrificing himself at the end and inject himself with the virus to save Chris and to save
Right.
the day in that. And I think he gets a shout out for being a one of the most interesting characters there. And to touch one last point on Resident Evil 6, the concept of Wesker's son, Jake, Jake
Yeah.
Mueller. I think that's a cool concept, and that's just once again, all those characters deserved a better game and or games because that was just too big a thing for what Resident Evil is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Some of those new characters, the idea, like you said, with him, with Sherry, well, not that she was new, but she was
right,
updated.
returning.
Yeah, Piers. I thought the new characters were almost more interesting than the existing characters in that game, like Leon and Chris.
Yeah.
But yeah, just yeah, they were kind of ruined by the fact that the game wasn't very good.
Yeah, and I forget the name of Leon's partner in that, and I
Yeah, I
didn't.
do too, but I actually
Yeah,
didn't mind her.
I didn't hate her, but she was clearly just a Claire stand-in. It
Yeah,
was
that's true.
it was really really bad. Like she was wearing she did the same red and blue like color scheme as Claire. She almost looked
That's
like she was Claire's long lost sister. It's like come on. So it's like this from a design perspective. I'm not trying to make fun of just like because her sister she's in it because and playing along because her sister gets kidnapped and infected with the virus. She's trying to save her, which makes sense. You're trying to save your family. We all get that plot line, but
yeah,
once again, all those characters deserved a better game and could have had a better chance at being like more memorable. But
absolutely.
it is what it is. So that's my heroes. So do you have any villains that stick out for you? Because there's a handful of villains I think are worth talking about.
Yeah, so I have to would say Wesker, Albert Wesker. He was the original big villain, the reveal, of course, that he was a traitor the whole time, which it was kind of predictable as you were going through the game. You kind of saw hints of it throughout the game, but it was still cool. And then I love when he comes back in Code Veronica.
Hmm?
I think he's really good in that game. So I mean, Wesker's got to be up there. He's a great villain, and I love all the villains in Resident Evil 7. The
Yeah.
whole family, they're all so good. Just like their dialogue, and how creepy they are. Like they're just the perfect. Because if you think about, the whole setting of that is like, they're trapped in this like middle of nowhere Louisiana, farm where whatever it is,
Yep.
with these like and just like that family. Obviously, it's not really them. They were like under the control
Yep.
of the little girl or
Corrupted.
whatever. But it's perfect like how they play that. It's so perfectly creepy. So I love all of them. I don't necessarily have a favorite. Maybe the dad would be my favorite one.
Yeah,
Um,
Jack.
yeah, but they're all really good. They all play those villains really well. Let's see who else. I don't. I wouldn't have too many more because, like, I don't know if I could say, let's say, like the tyrant, or because they're not really
Oh,
characters.
yeah.
I mean, they're bosses or enemies that you fight, but they don't get like speaking lines or anything like that. I mean, like I think Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 is a really cool villain, but I mean, again, like he's not really a character. He doesn't talk. He doesn't
Yeah.
like interact with you or anything like that.
They're like good
Whereas,
enemies. Like
right, exactly,
the Mr. X
um,
Tyrant for 2 and Nemesis for 3. Like they're good
exactly.
enemies, but they're not really, I mean, I guess we're splitting hairs, but they're not really like characters because they don't really have
No,
real personalities. They're just obstacles.
exactly. Yeah,
Anthropomorphic
yeah, I agree.
obstacles.
Yeah,
um yeah.
yeah, but
And,
yeah, Wesker and that entire family, like I said, of in Resident Evil 7 would probably be my favorites. I like the other Wesker too, Alex Wesker.
yep.
We talked about her a little bit last time in Revelations 2. I thought she was another really good, really creepy villain that was just super evil. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's probably it for me off the top of my head. The two Weskers and the entire family from Resident Evil 7.
Yep.
Those are all really good.
So I would say the best villains of Resident Evil are the ones you love to hate. And there's a handful of them, and there's not too many like villains, although like every game kind of introduces someone a bit new. Although Resident Evil 2 doesn't really have like Birkin turns himself into the monster, so you don't really get too much personality for him. And Annette,
No.
while she's antagonistic, I wouldn't say she's really a villain. And same thing
Yeah.
for Ada. Like they're antagonistic to
Right.
some degree, but they don't ever really take on villain status like the way Wesker is. They don't really have their personalities don't necessarily completely get away, or they're not the masterminds, I should say.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Wesker, of course, is great, and you can never not think about Wesker, especially with how they built him up in Code Veronica, leading to 5, and the way 5 capstones his entire existence. It's great. But there are a few more, and once again, unfortunately, you don't have the reference point for Resident Evil 4 because that I kind of want to group those three together. They create like there's like the head chief who's of the village, and his name's Mendez, and he doesn't say much, but he's an intimidating figure. So he kind of takes on that new Mr. X Nemesis style role of being there, of just being tough, and he's very no nonsense. And while he doesn't say too much, he's still got enough of a personality. And there's a little bit of like a tragic backstory where it shows like he was originally like paraplegic, and then part of the reason he like vouched for his like village kind of getting turned into like hideous monsters from the Lost Plagas is because Sadler shows up and essentially cures his condition by infecting him, and then the thing grows and essentially like repairs his spine and allows him to
Mm.
walk again. And then you realize like the thing actually became like a parasite inside his body, and like it becomes his
Hmm.
spine. So it's a little freaky cool thing, but like it's like a miracle performed. So then everyone like turns in. So he has kind of like this tragic story, and he's just kind of there. He doesn't understand like what's going on. But Sadler, he's got that charisma where he's like, oh, he just has absolute confidence. Like, oh, Leon, you think you Mr. American agent, and you're trying to save the world. That's the arrogance of the United States. And, like he has that perfect air of like cocky confidence. And
Yeah,
but he's a little more background. You don't talk to him nearly as much as I'd like to in retrospect. And then the act 2 when you're in the castle and you deal with Salazar. He is like he's the second hand, he's like the right hand man. He's the second in command for Sadler. But you talk to him a lot. Him and Leon have trade jabs all the time, and he's just this little annoying twerp. And he's like 24, 25 years old, and but he's got like dwarfism or something like that. So he's diminutive, and he's got like this kind of like high pitched squeaky voice. While he's also like, and he comes from the old money. You know, he owns this giant castle. His family's been around for generations, and he has this air of superiority, and that's what I love in Resident Evil villains is that, and you see that in the best ones. So like, I really do hope you play through 4 just for kind of like the experiment of it, because I know you made it through 5, man, and I know you didn't like it, but I think 4 is a little more your taste, and I think everything else is there for you to enjoy it. But then going
Yeah.
to jumping to 7, Lucas, and as you learn more, like you find out, oh man, everyone's like tragically like infected, and they're turning evil because of that. And like Jack Baker and Marguerite, like Marguerite, I don't think they characterize too much. She's just kind of this sadistic witch that you kind of
Hmm.
fight. It doesn't necessarily feel like it just doesn't feel the same as like Jack, who just seems to it feels like because he talks to you more and you have a little more fun with him.
Hmm.
That he's a bit better, but as you learn more, like you think like Lucas, oh yeah, no, Lucas is maybe he's also turned evil because of it. And then you find out later, like, no, he kind of had some, he's kind of like sociopathic tendencies throughout his entire childhood, and that's just kind of been exacerbated. Now he's like, oh, he kind of gets carte blanche to do whatever he wants, and
Hmm.
especially in his like madhouse area, and then in the Not a Hero DLC, that's the first epilogue piece where you play as Chris after the main campaign of 7. He gets a lot more stuff dialogue there, and you just he's just talking to you, and he makes you hate him more and more. And so that's what builds up to like the super satisfying conclusion when he gets turned into a monster and you get to kill him, and it's great. So think he's great. And then harkening back to our game here, and we'll talk a bit more about that, is in Code Veronica, is Alfred Alfred Ashford.
Hmm.
He also same thing. He's got that like cocky confidence, and he's just like a jerk and just taunting you and being sadistic. And like that's the thing, when the villains get sadistic and just like are constantly trying to terrorize the antagonist, I feel like it really is what makes a really good. And they kind of care about terrorizing, not like with like Simmons, where it's like he's just trying to keep people away. Like he's like, nope, like they're getting in the way of my plans, and he's trying to play the background. Like no, just when the villain is actively trying to be antagonistic, that's what works so well for Resident Evil. And that did remind me quickly. I wanted to throw it to a side character in Resident Evil 4. There's Luis Serra, and I think he's characterized really well. And he kind of takes up like the new Carlos role from like Resident Evil 3, and he's kind of like proto Carlos for Resident Evil 3 remake in terms of like trying to be like this like macho, this guy playing macho.
Hmm.
And I think it really works for like the B movie plot that we're dealing here with the emotional beats that they have with Luis. So yeah, with the villains, those are my favorite. Alex is not too bad. Once again, I don't think we spend enough time, but I really do like her motivation is clear, what she's going for. She does get to be a bit actively sadistic. She's got some nuance to her character, and I don't really love to hate her. I don't think we see enough of a sadistic. And I feel like people will criticize me like, you don't think she was being really sadistic by infecting people with a fear virus and try to make them afraid? I'm like, I, it. There's a different. I think the way in her tone, it's not quite as passionate as like Lucas, who felt like he was just playing with toys, and he's like, ah, he's
Right.
like, I'm having fun. Look at these fatties here when he does like the super big fat mold that he sends him after, and it's like, hey, they're going to take you out. It's like I don't feel like she's having as much fun as like Alfred or Lucas were, and even Wesker
Okay.
seemed like he was having fun, especially in Code Veronica when he's like
Oh yeah,
playing
he
with
loved it.
Chris and Claire, and you know he's like his air of superiority, even when he fights Alexia, and he
Hmm.
for like the brief second there, like it's yeah, that's where I'd say like Alex loses a little bit. Alex Wesker, just because I don't think she gets she sh- it doesn't come across that she's really having tons of fun with what she's doing. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
so there's just a little bit weaker, but she's not bad. She's certainly not bad at all. I wouldn't say she's a bad villain. There's like the other side characters from 5, like that were like hello, the one that turns into the sea monster.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy who was like the first guy you're chasing after in
Hmm.
Resident Evil 5. I forget exactly what his name was, but he kind of had that fun. Like he kind of reminded me of that, but he was also like you don't get enough time with him, and he's super weaselly. He's like super weaselly and cowardly. So that's where it's like he kind of loses some charm. Then once he
Yeah.
injects
Yeah.
himself, it turns into like this giant monster. It's like he kind of it's like okay, he left a mark, but I wouldn't say he's one of the best. So that's my thoughts on villains there. Uh,
Ooh.
is I think they've had a handful of good ones, but
Yeah.
that's yeah. Oh, and then also oh right, Resident Evil 3 remake, which you also haven't played yet, right?
Not yet. No.
Yeah. They punch up the writing for the main antagonist who backstabs everyone on the Umbrella Task Force. Nikolai. Nikolai.
Oh
Oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, they do the same thing I was just talking about. He seems like he's having fun with being evil. He becomes super memorable in that game. Like he was already kind of memorable, but once again, like just the punching up of the writing. You'll see. You'll play it and you'll be like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh man, yeah. You're like, that's a guy that he was a good villain for this Resident Evil story.
Cool. Okay.
So
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna
yeah.
play it sooner rather, but hopefully soon.
Oh
But yeah,
yeah.
so
Least
uh,
favorite characters.
yeah, I'll go through some of my least favorite characters. So first one I'll talk about. Well, I was thinking it might be a little controversial, but it sounds like you might agree. Chris is probably one of my least favorite characters. I don't love
Mhm.
Chris. And the reason for that, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is because I didn't play as him in the first game. I think we talked about this
Mhm.
when I played it for the first time. We played as Jill, so we had more of that connection to Jill because we played as her. And in that game, you don't really see Chris until the very end. And then we tried to play again as Chris. We tried to just do the gaming with Chris, and we didn't get very far. We were just like, yeah, it's kind of the same. There's not that much difference. So yeah, forget it. So we never ended up playing. So we never got that connection to Chris from the beginning like we did with Jill.
Mhm.
So I never established that like immediate like wow I know I think a lot of people do have more of a connection with Chris and do like him as a character because of that. So right from the beginning I never got that, and then he's in 5, which I didn't care for. He's in 6, which I didn't care for. I know he's in Code Veronica, which I liked, but I
Mhm.
preferred Claire in that game. So like to me he's fine in Code Veronica, but he's overshadowed by Claire. So all in all, I've just never felt that connection with him, especially considering that he's like one of the main, if not like the main Resident Evil person. He's up there with Leon and those people as far as like main characters and like well-known Resident Evil
Yeah.
characters. So yeah, I just never established that connection with him. I never got into him as a character. So
Mm.
he would be one of my least favorites.
Yeah, for a main protagonist, he is one of the like poorest written.
Yeah.
They he started out as just like the Boy Scout,
Yeah.
then like less naive a Boy Scout than Leon, because Leon's like fresh faced, and
Right. Yeah, he had already been in special
like, yeah,
forces, so he was a
yeah,
little more experienced.
yeah. Chris went had the military training. He's a pilot, and he's just like, he's been toughened up from that. He has the resolve, the military resolve, and then he just kind of they don't do much with his personality. And then Five's like, I just got to do the mission, just good mission, got to take care of my men, and Six, that's kind of he becomes disillusioned
Yeah.
and tired, and that's I think a logical arc for him becoming
It's
tired,
not bad. Yeah.
and we see hints of him. We've seen the teases in the Resident Evil 8 trailers that perhaps Chris is going to become an antagonist, but it's not 100% clear if it's actually Chris or what's going on. And I'm not even
Hmm.
just talking about how they can't settle on what they want Chris to look like because he has his look in Resident Evil 1 remake. Then in Code Veronica, he comes back and it's a pretty consistent look from there to there. They
Yeah.
redo, they update him a little bit for Resident Evil 5. He gets super jacked, and then but it's still like you almost, I guess he doesn't like facial wise, he doesn't look too different. He's just older, and he
Right.
gets a little more grizzled. And then 5 to 6 is pretty consistent. Then they completely redo him in like 7 for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
To the point where at the end when I was like, is that Chris? I was like,
Yeah,
because I think if I remember, he says my name's Redfield.
yeah,
So I was like, is that a different Redfield? I was like, it doesn't look like Chris. I mean, it kind of does, but like, yeah. So they did it like different to the point where I wasn't really sure. I was like, that maybe isn't Chris?
oh yeah. Everyone was like, is this really Chris, or is this maybe a different? Is this someone impersonating Redfield? Because why? Or Chris Redfield? Because why is he working for Umbrella? Or what's going on here? And
Yeah,
then they
yeah. Maybe
flesh it
that was
out.
done purposely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you look behind the scenes, like the developers explained, it was just a decision with with the RE engine to have a modernized Chris. And like, well, we're kind of harkening back to what would a logically older Chris look like from like that Resident Evil 1 based design. And when you look at it from that angle, he does look a little bit more like that. But
Hmm.
considering the established image of him between 5 and 6, and in Revelations 1, because he is in Revelations 1 and he's using that 5 model just modified.
Hmm.
Yeah, it just you're used to seeing him over all these years in real time, and then they drastically change him. And even if he doesn't look older, he looks like it's like Chris's other brother, like her cousin or something like that
Yeah, yeah,
shows up.
it does.
Uh,
It's like, huh.
so
Uh,
yeah, that was like a weird design decision, and it's not even the same voice actor, which was also weird. So like, they changed so much that it's not even convincing that it's the same
yeah.
person, and now they're kind of going back. I think they're using a different voice actor again, but
Mm.
the Resident Evil 8 Chris that we've seen looks a lot more like the Chris, because also there's a CG movie Chris in the third CG movie where they adjusted his look a little bit more. It's more based off the Resident Evil 5 version we're used to, but they change up his face just a little bit more. They kind of
Okay.
like trim down his face, and like, instead of having like this big block jaw, he's more of like a V jaw in my opinion. And then they kind of took that and they've modified it and kind of mixed that model with the 5 model to create this new grizzled Chris or what we think is Chris from Resident Evil 8. That's certainly what they're
Yeah.
teasing and trying to say they're trying to say he's Chris Redfield, but we don't know the
Hmm.
full story yet, of course.
Right.
So, the tentative Chris Redfield of Resident Evil 8, and yeah, they seem like they're trying to bring the look back, but I think it's the right voice actor. It's not the same voice actor from 5 Revelations and
Yeah. Something.
6, but we'll see. I don't know. I don't even know what's going on there, but yeah, for a
um,
protagonist, Chris has definitely not been characterized as well as he could, even though like the arc he's been on, I don't think is terrible, but it's hard to be endeared to him with this
yeah,
arc
that's the thing. Yeah,
when
I've never gotten near to him.
yeah, the foundation that was laid wasn't that strong.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. In Six's arc, it does make sense, and it is, the fact that he would become disillusioned and he's getting older and all that.
Mhm.
It makes sense. But yeah, I think I just wasn't invested in him enough in the first place to care. Whereas, like with Leon, you were talking about his character development. I care a lot more about him. I was much more invested
Yeah,
in Leon, whereas I just never got that with Chris.
yeah.
So yeah,
I th-
just never one of my favorites.
yeah, I think to fix Chris, they really should have leaned into more about like we don't see him interact with Claire too much except in Code Veronica,
Yeah, you're
and
right.
and he and he doesn't really get to interact with other characters in a very empathetic way. Of course, he spends the entire game in 5 with Sheva, but they're both like very doing the mission, and they don't really have a chance to necessarily like any heart to heart or really anything like that. And he does interact with Jill a bit, and he obviously cares about Jill. It's just, and he cares about like the people he works with and the soldiers. Like it shows that, but he never really gets a chance to truly be human for an extended period of time. He doesn't really have much of a sense of humor about him, like all the other
Right.
characters have had, and that's where yeah, they kind of need to do that. And who knows? We'll see what they're doing. It seems like they might be going for the whole turn the hero into the villain for the good, like good intentions, but going too far, and that might be what they're trying to do with Chris to 8. But we'll see.
Yeah. 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 So I'll go through a couple of my other least favorite characters. I just have a couple more. I don't care for Rebecca or Billy. I think we
Oh
touched on
well,
this a little bit last time. I didn't hate Zero, but I didn't love it either. I thought it had some issues. And one of the issues was that I didn't love either character. Rebecca, again, it kind of goes back to my Resident Evil 1 point of I never played as Chris, so I never got Rebecca. Like if playing as Jill, there's
hmm
nothing about Rebecca. Like you don't interact with Rebecca even for a second. So
right, yeah,
having not played as Chris in that one, I never really got anything with Rebecca. And then in Zero, she's fine, but I don't know. I don't love her. And same with Billy. I guess I shouldn't say they're my like would be least favorites. They're just like I
yeah,
didn't care about either of them. I didn't feel super invested in either of them. I wasn't like I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. With Resident Evil, you can get part of the game is getting really invested into those characters, and the fact that they were the two main characters, and I didn't really care that much about either of them. I guess so. Maybe I shouldn't say they were least favorites. They're just kind of they're just kind of there.
yeah.
Um,
I agree a little bit. I think they don't make as much of an impact, but it also for Rebecca it's complicated because I don't remember if it's the director, but there's someone in the development team that like he doesn't like Rebecca, and he says like
Really?
she's just written as like a useless character, and I'm paraphrasing strongly, but that's one of those things where it's funny because it's like, well, that's your fault. You
Right.
didn't write the character to be better. Like
That's hilarious.
you can't hate the character you create. Like you can't actively
Yeah.
hate the character when you're the one who made that character bad. Like that's not.
Right.
Which may who knows? Maybe behind the scenes, like no, some dude, one of the other people on the team wrote Rebecca, and that guy had no input on it, and he's just like, I don't even get to change the character because like it's not my character or something like that, or who knows? Maybe he didn't even want that character to exist in the beginning at all. It's tough to say, but yeah, like hating that
That's
character
funny.
when you had control of the project and like
Right.
that's like it's kind of on you, bud. So I think so that's a meta thing where Rebecca's not written is written unfairly.
That's
But
funny.
but I do think like she's a good concept because she's like the first like fresh faced like she's had military training. She's like a prodigy and she's the med
Yeah.
staff. So like there's that innocence factor when in the horror genre that's like seeing her develop over time could have been amazing and develop through
Right.
that. So and I think she handles herself well. Like she's not written like as a coward. She's scared and
Right.
nervous, but she's not a coward in Zero. And then
And
Billy,
yeah.
sorry, go on.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna say just one more point on Rebecca.
Yeah.
As far as like her being an interesting character, it is kind of cool that she's the only one that survives from that crew. Like you have this
Yeah.
whole big crew with all these experienced people. She's the youngest one, and she's the only one
Yep.
that survives. So that is kind of an interesting point. But yeah, yeah, go ahead, Von Billy.
Yeah. And then for Billy, he's kind of just written to be like that partner character. I don't think he's bad. I don't think we get enough, and I'm okay with him. I don't hate him. I don't like dislike him. I think he's fine. He's got enough motivation. It makes sense for why he's there, and he's just kind of there to be the sidekick to Rebecca or be like the tanky character of the duo since you do plays the two. And I think he's fine. He's got military training. He's in a compromising situation, so he's kind of like he's kind of got to play things in an interesting way, but he doesn't really have a reason to be a bad guy other than just trying to maybe get away. But he's not a bad person, which is part of the arc where it's like, look, I've been arrested for being a part of this bad thing. I tried to stand up to it. I got framed for the slaughtering a village of people when we were on a military operation here. So I'm a dead man walking because the government doesn't want me, or the government believes that I'm a bad guy. So you know what? As long as I can make it out of this alive, then I'm just gonna skedaddle. And he's like, all right, well, if you're not gonna bring me, and once Rebecca, because Rebecca doesn't really believe him, and you know the interactions they have, I think it's fine. I think they're actually compared to Resident Evil 1, I'd say they have a lot more like meaningful interaction than like the characters in Resident Evil 1. That's a
Yeah.
little unfair to like between Jill and Barry,
Yeah, I
but
mean the times were different, obviously. Of
yeah,
I mean in Zero, you're playing as both characters, so
yeah,
it's a little different. But yeah, I mean I agree. You know, Billy did have a nice arc. So I guess I wouldn't they wouldn't be least favorite. I don't hate them, but
right. You
they're
don't
not
actively
bad. But they
dislike them,
just
but they're not.
yeah they don't do anything for me. I need the characters that I like, the ones that I've mentioned as some of my favorites, are ones that like I feel a connection with. In Resident Evil games, I like to feel a connection,
Hmm.
and I just didn't feel a connection with them. So I guess it's not that they were bad characters or anything like that. It was just I never. By the time the game ended, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I could take them or leave them. Like, you know.
Yeah, I that's the thing. I have my villains that I love to hate, and
Hmm.
that's a good association. And when I look at actual characters that I actively dislike, as in like negative, like oh my god, this character's just I can't stand it. I don't really have tons of characters like that.
Yeah.
Um, you know, from a personality standpoint, mechanically, I can be upset when characters feel like broken or enemies feel too strong or doing cheap things, etc. But
Yeah. Yeah.
like when it comes to like the characters with personality, I mean I can say like these are the least interesting characters. Like in Resident Evil 5, like, we were
Sure.
talking about the guy who turns into the sea monster. He's not that interesting. Gianna or whatever her name was that was like all up on Wesker. Like she's not all that interesting, and she gets what she deserves and whatnot. Revelation, I have to say though, I would probably be the one where I'm like actively so disappointed in the plot. Like a lot of those characters just are. a lot of the villainous characters and even the side characters in that, it's just meh.
Yeah.
The whole story's kind of meh.
Hmm.
There could be multiple reasons for that. I think like I think in Revelations, 'cause I don't remember most of their names. Like I think you're the commissioner for the BSAA. He was decent because of stuff going in and how they kind of played behind the scenes. Like he's being a little shady. We can't tell if he's actually a good guy or bad guy, and then it
Yeah,
turns out like
yeah.
he was trying to suss out the real thing, and then he takes responsibility. And see, he ends up turning out okay. I like how he is. But then there's like the Conan O'Brien stand-in dude that I'm just like whatever. The new double agent girl, I think her name was like Jessica or something, and she was
Hmm.
all hitting on Chris, but she's actually like this weird double agent. Like she's so whatever. Um, the the scapegoat villain guy that they have, who's like that's the evil organization in that one. That's the fake one. He ends up just he's nothing. Then there's the guy who's really behind it, who's the government guy, the guy with the beard. Just like he's he's like, well, I'm doing this to prove that my organization, that bioterror is still an issue. So I create bioterror to stay in power because this will be an issue. I'm like
Yeah, it's
okay, I get the plot thread there, but he has like no. They try to write the charisma for him. He falls
yeah,
so
yeah.
flat, and I think it's part of it. He isn't in there enough to make sense.
Hmm.
He's kind him and like Simmons from Six are kind of like the same type of like you're trying to just hold your power, but you're just so pathetic.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
go. Well, I only have a couple more
oh
to mention.
Simmons,
Maybe
I
two.
actively hate
Simmons was
Simmons.
one I was gonna mention. Yeah,
I actively hate Simmons' character because
yeah,
his what he does, his the thing he does about Ada Wong is
yeah.
so
It's so bad.
trash. It's
Yeah,
so
he was
bad.
one I was gonna mention as one of my least favorites. He's such a bad villain. It just so that whole storyline's bad.
He's so bad. I love you, Ada. But Ada refuses to be with me. I'm going to turn my
So
wife into Ada Wong. All right, now you're physically a perfect replica of Ada. Oh, wait, the personality didn't come with it.
shoot.
So, away with you. And I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, that was bad.
It's like, it's not. I don't know what it would take. I feel like it's like 3 steps away from being like so bad it's good. But it's
Yeah, yeah. It's
just
not. It's still just bad.
terrible.
Yeah, it's
So bad.
yeah, it was rough.
If it was, they should have just completely dumped that. They could have even done like maybe Ada Wong is like a clone project thing, so there's multiple Ada Wongs. That could have been cool. That could have been
Hmm.
cool. But Simmons being something more like, I think the core point where it's like, no, we work with bioterrorist organizations for the defense of the United States, and then the government, like the president, was about to out us, and that would have been terrible. On top of I would have been out of a job, and it just that would have made the security like that core point, even though it's not the most interesting, would have it been a better thread on its own and motivation than adding in that whole Ada Wong
Yeah, it's bad.
cloning love triangle thing. It was just like,
Yeah,
wow.
he was gonna be one of my choices for least favorite characters. He was bad.
That's yeah, actively the worst. That one I actually do totally totally hate for real. It's just like wow. Yeah.
And then I only have one more,
Speaks to
and
why I
again,
haven't played it. I just watched that for people who are going like, "Wait, you haven't played it, but how do you know all this?" I watched a silent let's play just so I could get the plot cuz yeah, I'm that kind of weirdo when it comes to Resident Evil that I care about the
that,
mystery and developments of the plot.
that's
But yeah.
cool. I only have one more that I want to mention, and again, it's not necessarily a least favorite, but somebody I just didn't connect with.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna say Ethan from Resident Evil 7, and it's funny
Oh
because
yeah.
I loved Resident Evil 7. I thought it was great. We talked about earlier. I loved the villains, that whole family. I thought they were great. I loved most everything about the game. And again, it's not that I hated Ethan or that he was a bad character, but I just didn't feel that connection. And you know what? I think part of the reason is because it was first person,
Mhm.
so you never see him. I,
Yep.
I, I was I was actually kind of thinking about that as I was playing the game. Like you never. I don't know if that's something that seems weird, but like compared to all the other Resident Evil games, when you have that third person point of view or whatever you call it, you never see Ethan. I never felt that connection with him because like I don't know how to describe it. I mean, maybe you can have that connection because it is first person. You can kind of feel like you are Ethan,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I like being able to see the character and like I can't describe it. There was just something about him that he was just kind of a boring character to me.
Yeah.
And his whole motivation was kind of so so the whole thing is like, okay, he sees he's getting those like Mia disappears or whatever, and he's getting
Hmm.
those emails, and he gets that one from her specifically that says like, "Don't come after me." So now he
That one was never
decides.
sent.
Oh, it wasn't okay.
Yeah, I think that's how it went. Is that Mia recorded it and tried to send it, but everything went topsy turvy, and so it never actually got sent to him. So he gets that letter
The one
later
that says
on.
to come
Yeah.
find her or
So he
whatever.
never got that previous video.
So even still, so this girl's been missing for however long.
Like three
She's
years.
Yeah, so she's been missing forever. She's in some weird backwoods area of
Yeah.
Louisiana, who knows where. He decides to just go by himself.
Yep.
He's not like, oh, maybe I should involve the police. Like, this girl's been missing for 3 years. Maybe I should take some other people with me as backup.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right.
I should take some weapons. Maybe I should do like he just goes into this weird middle of nowhere house, backwoods area,
Yeah.
unprepared for a girl that's been missing for 3. So clearly there's some sort of foul play involved if this girl's been missing for that long. So like his whole motivation was just very, I don't understand his thinking or his reasoning behind it. And then again, like I said, I just never, he wasn't bad. He's not like, I didn't hate him. He's not like a character I could say is my least favorite, but I just never, as good as the game was, I never found that connection with him. I kind of felt the same way about Mia, but I felt a little bit more of a connection with her because she does have that back storyline of like, oh, she's she's like good, but she's kind of evil. She was kind of doing this bad stuff on the side, but like, and she's also like infected, and there was a little bit more to her character. I felt like Ethan was just kind of there. He was just kind of whatever. He's just kind of a guy. So
Yeah.
um,
His reason how he goes unprepared is completely flimsy for the
yeah,
setup there. All he does is tell his one friend like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go."
yeah, yeah,
But him and Mia were married. They were husband and wife, so like there's that emotional connection there.
yeah.
And I know that neither one of us are like in relationships right now, but that's one of those things where I think if you were married, and we don't know how long they were married for, but
Right.
they're married, they're in love. If she suddenly like disappears and you don't really have explanations, and we don't even know like if if the employer that Mia was working for ever actually like contacted like Ethan to let him know like she's missing in action, but he just knows she's gone because she didn't come back in time.
Yeah.
So to be like that person that you love so much, to be like if there's even a chance of them to be alive, of course you're gonna go and find that out. But yeah, like you're saying, like he didn't bring a friend, he didn't go, yo, can I
Yeah.
go, or
Like
didn't like with the
something.
police or contact the authorities and stuff like that and be
Yeah.
like,
Like, oh,
hey,
hey,
my
I
wife
have
is
like a
missing.
lead. Yeah, I have a lead on this person that's
Could
been
I get
missing for 3 years.
yeah,
Let's check this out.
could I get someone to go with me? I know this is crazy, but like my wife's been missing, and I do that like, and there's no setup for that. There's no excuse. There's no in plot excuse, even if they were weak. Just to be like he tried to be more reasonable and just
Yeah.
went into the like you said into the middle of the bayou and stuff. And be like, wow, this is all weird and
It's
whatnot.
kind
But
of
yeah,
the opposite of what you mentioned with Barry from Revelations 2, where he's like, okay, Moira is missing. I know where she is. I know what I've got to do. I'm going to go in ready to go. I'm loading up as much
yeah,
weaponry as I could find. I'm going in. I'm ready to find her. I'm ready to fight whatever gets in my way. I'm getting out of there alive. I'm finding her alive, all that stuff. It's
yeah.
kind of the opposite of that, where he's like, meh, well, I guess I'll just go to this place and see what happens.
Now there's a slight difference in that just going by what was actually written, and that's because Claire and Moira were like violently and actively kidnapped. Like, they're having that party and the terrorist organization breaks in and literally kidnaps everyone.
Right, right.
So Barry already knows it's going to be a hostile situation.
True.
Whereas with Ethan, yes, there's no idea. He just gets a
Yeah.
letter all of a sudden that says for Mia, and he's just like, well, I love her and I got like no other leads. I might as well take a shot because if she is alive and I can bring her back, then that's that I'm going for it. But him
Hmm.
not seemingly taking any other reasonable precautions and going somewhere, not being like, hey, police, can you? And like even having a phone call with the police to be like, hey, like my wife's been missing for 3 years and I got this letter. Do you think? And the cops like even
Yeah.
dismissing him on the call, being like, buddy, we get calls like that all the time. Sorry,
Exactly.
like
It was
we
just
can't
something as
help you.
simple as
Like,
that. Yeah.
you know,
Then that would something as simple as that would have been perfect because then that would have been
Or yeah, like,
reasonable.
oh, it's
Okay,
gonna take a
I'm
week and we'll
doing
get
this
an
on my
office,
own. You know what?
or
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
we'll get an
I
officer to look
tried.
into it.
Exactly. And, then
Right.
that would give him more motivation. He's like, okay, you know what? I tried, but she, she's
It
my
would just
wife. I'm
frame
going to
it
go
better.
find
Yeah.
her. I think that would have actually made his character a lot better because it would have seemed like, he cares even more. He was trying to do the right thing and get people involved and they weren't listening. So he's like, you know what? I got to do this myself. I've got to do what I've got to do. So I think that would have been a simple fix right there.
Yeah. And then at least he's not a silent protagonist. I think I agree. I definitely agree with you on the first person. Like being able to see the face, seeing emoting, and through the physical, actions that they take when interacting with other people. And he does have some from the first person
Hmm.
perspective, but it's not. As humans, we appreciate body language so much
Sure.
as a communication method on top of speech. So yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's like some moments where it's really strong, like when he interacts with the cop and gets the knife for the first time at the window. He's like, and it's funny because Ethan could be like so hit or miss with his characterization, but he's just like, wait, you gotta give me your gun. And I'm just like, dude, you are asking a cop for their gun? You're in like clearly he's in a desperate situation. He's kind of afraid for his life, but at the same time, it's like I'm. He's like you got to have a little bit of perspective here, bud. Like, cop's not
Yeah.
gonna give your gun. He's gonna distrust you way more. But at least he's like,
Right.
at least the cop then, and I applaud actually the cop's performance more than Ethan's at this point, where the cop's like, you know what? Okay, clearly not gonna give this guy my gun, but I have a knife. I'll give him the knife. I can defend
Yeah.
myself from a knife fight.
It's something. Yeah.
I'll give you something. Because if there is something going on, I'm hedging my bets here. So
Hmm.
I actually like the cop more than I like Ethan, despite the
That's
cop's
true.
only in there for like what? He's on screen for maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Poor cop. He has a rough
Yeah,
ending.
yeah. They try to write Ethan pretty well, and like I said, he's very hit or miss. But yeah, I think I agree with you. He just I think it's kind of all over the place and it's a little flimsy, and but everything else around him is so well done.
Yeah,
Um,
the game itself, it's is so good that it kind of makes up for it, I think.
yeah, and we'll see what happens with Resident Evil 8 because Ethan is the protagonist for Resident Evil 8 again, and we'll find out where they take his character if they do much more with it, or it's kind of like one of those things where they're really kind of writing like he's not going to be a full blank slate because we want him to talk to people, but he's got attitude and but yeah, it almost like they don't really have a real direction. They're just kind of writing him to fit in instead of actually having like a character then to
Right.
write into the scenario. So yeah, it's I agree with you. Ethan's not the best character, but he's not terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. So, yeah, that's all I had on characters. So, I feel like we talked a lot about that, but there's a lot to talk about with Resident Evil characters. So, I'm ready to jump into a little bit of Code Veronica / Code Veronica X talk. If you are.
Yeah. So that's the thing. We hope that all of the Resident Evil games that did the classic camera view get remade into the third person camera view. And I think that's like our basic point there because I want to talk both mechanical and story and stuff like that. But I think we can kind of agree that that's kind of the point of these remakes at this point. Although Resident Evil 1 remake is amazing as it stands
Hmm.
and a testament to that classic style of Resident Evil gameplay, Resident Evil 2 remake, given the time and energy that went into it, and even Revelations 2 to some extent, even though it's structurally different than classic Resident Evils. Resident Evil 2 remake stands as showing like, oh, you can make this survival horror game in this style, and it still feels like the classic, but it can use the new camera angle, it can have modernized gameplay elements, and
Yep.
still feel and bring back that feeling of the authentic static camera Resident Evil games, that atmosphere, that yeah, just all of that. Do you agree with me on that one?
Oh, 100%. We might have touched on this last time, but
Yeah.
Revelations 2 is what brought me back into Resident Evil, and I think for the reasons you just mentioned, because the game I played before that was 6, and
Yep.
I was just so disillusioned at that point. Because, like I said, I didn't care for 5. I know some people like 5.
Hmm.
I really didn't care for 6 at all. 6 is got to be by far my least favorite.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was just really disillusioned. I'm like, 5 and 6 were pretty much just shoot 'em ups. What happened to Resident Evil? It's not survival horror anymore. The game's totally different. 6 wasn't even fun.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. So I was pretty much just done with it at that point, and then I played Revelations 2, and that was the next game I played after 6, and it was pretty much just to your point of what you just said was like, wow, they could do this. Like this feels like a modern Resident Evil game, but it's back to having survival horror elements. It wasn't quite full survival horror like 7 was, but
Hmm.
it was back to being creepy again. It wasn't just a full on shoot 'em up. It was I thought they did a good job of blending in elements of both modern elements with
Hmm.
old school elements. So that Revelations 2 was what really got me back in and saying like, okay, I believe in the Resident Evil franchise again. I
Yeah.
feel good about it again. They're moving in the right direction. They're taking the fans criticism to heart. A lot of obviously people were vocal about disliking 6. So yeah, so that I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. And it's funny to see the game trajectory because you reach 4, and 4 is an incredible fan and critic darling, but it does depart strongly from the classic Resident Evil formula because it's not really about exploring a space and solving puzzles. It's more of like an
Yeah.
action game where you progress straight forward, and there's some areas where you get a little more room to explore and loop around, and there's a few puzzles here. And Resident Evil puzzles aren't always super complex ultimately. They're more
No.
they feel obfuscated because of like the weird like why is this a spade key and like I have to fix
Right.
this music box or something like that. Like the puzzles are actually really simple, but they feel more obfuscated because the objects are so weird and abstract.
Hmm.
So that's something I'll touch on. But if you play the games like this, if you do 1, 2, 3 Code Veronica, you see like this natural progression here, and then of course there's 0, and then remake 1. But remake 1 is just you can slot that in as number 1. So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3 all feel, and not remake 2 and 3, but you can slot that in now for 0, remake 2. Sorry, I'm getting my own order mixed up for my point here. So let me back up just a little bit. So if you play in the regular official release order of like 1, 2, 3 Code Veronica, you kind of see that progression there. Then 4 happens. It's a radical departure. You're like, okay. And then if you just skip 5 and 6 and instead play Revelations 1 and then Revelations 2, you see them kind of walk it back from 4. So if you play Revelations 1, you see that they modernize the controls a bit more with moving and shooting and like the dodge mechanic that Jill gets, but they still mix in like this weird episodic thing because it was originally a handheld game. And then they do have some actiony moments that are more like Resident Evil 4, but they kind of walk the balance a bit better because they do have a few puzzles and you do explore some more maze-like areas with the ship. And then you hit Revelations 2, which further modernizes the controls in a better way. They have the progression system, which is kind of weird, but they still manage to have like this inventory system. The co-op's pretty good. The story's a lot better. Revelations 1's weakest thing is that its story, in my
Mm.
opinion. I just couldn't get invested. I'm just going through the motions, and I was just impressed by the gameplay more by that because I'm like, oh, you're modernizing Resident Evil further, and this makes so much sense, and it finally feels like the way Resident Evil should feel in terms of like controls. And then Revelations 2 refines that more, and it still balances like, okay, there's some puzzle solving here, and you kind of get to explore areas a bit more, but there's still a few actiony bits, but they're not too actiony. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And then you get 7, and it's like, okay, we take all those lessons and now we really go back to like survival horror, just a few combat scenarios here and there because they're just obstacles, and with a few good boss fights sprinkled in and a few combat sections. And then you get Resident Evil Remake 2. And it's like, oh, all the lessons learned are culminated here. Like 7's like, yes, just a little bit more, maybe not first person. let's
Yeah.
not do first person maybe. And then you get your third person with Resident Evil 2 remake, and it's just like, mwah, chef's kiss, perfect. So yeah, I feel like with that, we'll see how 8 goes. I feel like 8's not going to be too bad, and it sounds like they're trying to do a little bit more of like an open area thing, but that's like what. And I explained a little bit more about what I feel about like the Resident Evil area, but let's get into the actual meat of talking about Code Veronica remake and
Sure.
contextualize those kind of changes we want there. So, Paul, this is probably our biggest point of contention, not necessarily between you and me, but in general, is we have to fix a little bit about Code Veronica's storytelling when it comes to Alfred Ashford and his relationship with Alexia Ashford.
Yes.
I think that's the part we really should suss out first, and then everything else I think we won't have as difficult a time as fixing.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me say, I'm sorry, just before we start, I will say Code Veronica X. I never played Code Veronica because I didn't have a Dreamcast, but
Mm-hmm.
Code Veronica X for the PS2.
Code Veronica X,
It,
yeah, is the PS2, and that's the updated like definitive version of it. So
yeah,
there's
so that was the one I played. Before we start, I just want to say that is my favorite Resident Evil game of all time. If I had to
mhm,
pick one, I love that game.
okay.
So a lot of the things we'll talk about as far as updating or modernizing or critiquing, are things we want to see improved. But I do love that game. So
Mhm.
I do want to say that I think it is a great game.
Yeah, it does have some flaws. The original does have some flaws in terms of structure, and we can address those and fix them. It suffered from being like an in between where they tried to hold on to too much of the old stuff, didn't really think through the new stuff because they were playing with their new technology. But ultimately, in retrospect, since I've used guides and I know how to play the game, it's not as bad. It's much more manageable, but it's certainly got its roadblocks, and that's the thing. Like first time through, it's unreasonably difficult for the first time through, and really does have some like curveballs that throw at you gameplay wise, mechanically, that just aren't fair to players, especially with the way the system is for like you can save lock, and if you're not doing like multiple saves throughout all the different steps and whatnot, you can really screw yourself and you have to like start the game over. And for some people, maybe they're fine with that, but it ultimately doesn't feel like a disrespecting of people's time, and it does suck that like any of the remasters haven't added in some fixes or rebalancing for some of
Hmm.
that. But regardless, as we've talked about, the story, Alfred and Alexia's relationship, it's it's portrayed, and I'm not trying to be vulgar, but we'll just be honest and frank about this. Is like it's kind of like kind of incestuous. Alfred is
Oh,
like
100%.
is super obsessed with Alexia to the point where it sounds like he wants to, he's in love with his sister, not
Yeah,
just loves
it's
his
weird.
sister. It's weird devotion. Now, it does add to a creepy factor, and also it doesn't hold up in a modern sense or insulting. I almost feel bad saying this. I don't know if I really should, but I think it is like the way they portray his obsession, where he does cross dress as Alexia.
Hmm.
It kind of holds up to like an old trope that like evil people cross dress and whatnot. So it's not fair to like
Hmm.
transgender people. And we're a transgender friendly podcast here, by the way, everyone. So it doesn't matter. People are people. So
Yeah, that
uh,
whole it's definitely, in my opinion, the weak. I don't want to say the weak point, but the point that probably needs fixing the most is their relationship.
it won't
Because
hold up in modern times. It will
no,
seem pretty offensive on top of just being really
yeah,
strange.
because I do love one of the parts I love about Code Veronica is that they do go into that backstory of the whole Ashford family and all. I love learning about that backstory and how deep they go. So if they could still do that without making the creepy factor of this guy that's kind of in love with his sister, I think that would be really nice.
So yeah, I thought about it because I think you can curb it because you need to maintain that active sadisticness that Alfred
Hmm.
Ashford has, and I like his voice too. If they could bring back that or get something very
It is
similar, I don't
good,
want him to
yeah.
change it too much. I want them to have that goofy laugh. I want him to seem like this weird, sinister clown guy. But what we can change, I think, is how he portrays himself talking about his devotion to Alexia. I think we need to completely scrap that scene where it looks like they're almost going to kiss after taking the dragonfly's wings off.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
we apologize for users for some visual descriptions here, but like this game does have some really weird stuff. And at the time,
Really weird.
it's creepy and it does kind of feed into that atmosphere, but in a modern context, it's not gonna hold muster. We just need to redo that despite how legitimately creepy and off-putting that stuff is. It's not gonna be good in context. But because of the way like Alfred devotes himself to Alexia, and she's supposed to be this genius, and they're both clones and stuff like that. Or essentially, yeah, they're clones. I think they're clones. Yeah, I think they're clones. Yeah, they were like lab things. I don't remember if they were actually legitimately
um,
born, but like also genetic manipulation. Regardless, like
yeah,
that part you could work in there, or I take it or leave it. Not really important.
right.
Alexia is a genius. Alfred isn't as smart as she is. He's competent because clearly he kept her protected for 15 years. He was
Hmm.
ruthless to do it, but he was competent at least. And we could reframe that as he's more like her loyal soldier and take out the any inclination that he's in love with her. It's I think it's just like phrasing. Like he's when he's talking about Alexia, it's like she will be the queen of this world, and it's like a tonal thing. I feel like we and I don't know how you hold that with the voice, but some of the delivery and stuff, I feel like just a little bit of writing tweaks, and it
Yeah,
just seems like he sounds more like a believer in like a religious cult is what he needs to sound like instead of like
right.
this like Alexia and like no,
Yeah,
he'd be like my queen Alexia like that. Like, does that make sense to you?
yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, because if you're going to do a remake, you do have to stay, pretty true to the story
Yeah.
as much as you could. So you don't want to do wholesale changes. So you do still want to keep that relationship between them
Yeah.
intact. But so the way you mentioned, it still keeps that relationship intact and has it make sense without having it be super just creepy and awkward and weird. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably would be the best way to go about it. Yeah, I think you would still have this. You'd still be able to tell the same story, but not make it as awkward.
Yeah. So then here's the other part, because I kind of like the idea that he was kind of going insane from the loneliness of like not having Alexia around,
Hmm.
but how to separate that properly to make him still seem like criminally insane, but also like part of the reason is because he does care about his sister and like show that devotion because you really need to make it you need to sell that he is like drinking the Kool-Aid when it comes to Alexia ruling the world by becoming a
Hmm.
biohazard mutant. So I'm curious, like take away the cross-dressing 100%. Like that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Take away the talking to himself in Alexia's voice. I think maybe something like maybe he does have like a statue or something of her or like a definitely like a voice recording or a video recording of her that he can like talk to or something like that. I don't know. Like that's the part I struggle with the most is I want something there where he's like she's impersonate like he's trying to deceive that she's there. So maybe like even though it's supposed to be like early 90s, maybe there's some weird like computer generated imagery stuff that they try like Alexia still talks, but it's because it's like a computer generated thing. So she just appears on monitors. You never see her in person.
Hmm.
And then Alfred's the only one like acting in orders and you hear what sounds like recordings of Alexia talking to Alfred, and maybe that's how you change that up to make it feel less creepy, but still off-putting, and give that have the deception that Alfred's like tricking himself into believing she's tricking himself and everyone around him that Alexia is actually still around.
Yeah, I think you do need that, or I would like to keep it anyway, because I thought that was kind of a cool or interesting twist about it. I remember playing the game through the first for the first time,
Hmm.
and I was a little bit like confused. I'm like, oh, is she still alive? Is there two of them? Is that
Hmm.
like what's good? I thought that was kind of a cool part of the game, even though, like you said, maybe the cross dressing wouldn't necessarily hold up today. So if they could accomplish the same thing
Hmm.
in a different way, I think that would be perfect because I did think that was a really cool twist of like, oh, he was like just kind of like it wasn't really her this whole time. Like he's just crazy. He's just out of his mind. And he's like fabricating this whole thing on his own.
Hmm.
Uh,
That or I could see them introducing like a small extra character and it could be a body double. Although, like, it does kind of compromise on the part where he is so devoted to Alexia that he would be absolutely appalled at the idea of someone like impersonating her.
yeah.
But maybe for this modern take, in order to make it to sell it a bit more, it would make sense as like he creates a body double, like he hires someone, and you find out like maybe he's gone through hundreds of body doubles and he like kills them whenever they're not perfect. But that way there's a body double, so there's no cross dressing. It's just a girl that he hires, and then that feeds into his sadism as someone he's taking advantage of these people. But or maybe it's even a new character that completely buys into it, and
So you
it's
have
like
another
another
evil character. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like a clone who's also another clone, or maybe even they could do another sibling that's like bought into like Alexia is going to be our ruler, so I will make sure that nobody interrupts her slumber. So those are like my two ideas there. I'm not sure they're the best, but something like that would be, I think, what you still need in order to. So, what do you think about that, or do you think maybe they should just drop the whole trying to impersonate Alexia thing, and Alfred's just there, like doing all
Yeah,
this?
I don't think they should drop it. Like I said, I thought that was a cool aspect. I thought the fact of Alexi or no, I'm getting them confused that Alfred trying to be Alexia, or at least trying to, maybe not necessarily trying to be her, but I want them to keep it intact, keep the story intact, that he's at least having the illusion, maybe to other people or maybe even to himself, that Alexia is still alive,
Yeah.
that she's still there. So I want that to be around still. It doesn't mean that like he needs to dress as her, or maybe even that he needs to impersonate her, but I do like the idea of there being some sort of story where, like, as far as he's concerned in his mind, and what he's trying to portray is that she is still alive, she is still around. So I would like them to keep that in some form or another.
Yeah, and it's so hard because some of this it's about treading on. You don't want to insult people with like mental disabilities or things like that in these portrayals.
Yeah.
So, because I was also thinking, oh, what if he's like having hallucinations where he's looking at like a portrait or a statue of Alexia that he has in like his private collection and talking to her like, I need your guidance, Alexia, please.
Hmm.
And like he hears her voice in his own head and he has like
Yeah.
psychoses and he's insane, criminally insane or something like that. Like, I hope you can write that in a way that's not offensive to people with like legitimate mental health issues, because that's the whole point here is we're trying not we're trying to make this character evil, but not like insensitively from like the because that the 90s was full of that kind of stuff, which is why
Sure.
a lot of it doesn't hold up now as in writing. So still trying to portray that, but those kind of aspects that make him creepy and scary, and those things I think are crucial to why Code Veronica's creepy. And maybe who knows what they'll do with it if they ever do create it
Yeah.
is that. But that will be really interesting to see how they do it. Or who knows, maybe they double down and they keep it and they change it and they're like, nope, we still think it's creepy and we're just gonna do it, and maybe we touch up one little aspect here or there. I don't know.
They
So
might.
that
You
that'd
never
be
know.
even
Yeah.
more bold and interesting. I don't know how well that would do, but there's other games that have gotten away with weirder, I guess.
I
I'm
was
not
gonna
at
say, I mean, there are a lot of offensive things in video games. I mean, think about like everything GTA does, for example. So I guess it's not
yeah,
unrealistic that they might keep some of that stuff.
yeah,
I
and
guess
I'm
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
and to make it clear, we're not advocating for that. We're to our audience here, like we're definitely fine with these things being changed to be non-offensive and being written in better ways, so that way people don't feel excluded, because that's not the point of Resident Evil. Resident Evil's political statement is definitely not supposed to be about that. Even though there are probably some developers who may have those kind of feelings and things. There are people
Sure.
who have those, and those kind of people exist. But that's not our goal with this remake. We'd certainly want it to be much more written and much more of I don't necessarily want to say PC, but like yeah, definitely modernize it in a less offensive way.
Yeah,
Because there's certainly
modernized way,
other
I think is, yeah.
creepy horror things in there. Like there's the doctor that's performing experiments on there. Alfred is clearly like enjoying trying to torture and send monsters after Claire.
Hmm.
So there's definitely a bunch there that even if they sacrificed all that extra like creepy relationship factor stuff, you could still do well. But I feel like something there helps add to make Alfred a much more to make him an enjoyable villain because of how like criminally insane he is.
Right.
But maybe you don't need that, and I'm just being a little narrow-minded on that to try and be too faithful. So we'll see. But okay, I like that we got that point out of the way there. We'll kind of go a little bit in chronological order of the game's like story. I think we need to redo that intro, that 90s helicopter shooting thing for Claire.
It was so cool at the time, though. I
It
remember
was.
watching that. I was like, "This is awesome." I was like, "I
It
love
was.
this."
But
But
I
yeah,
think
they
that
could they
that
could
needs to be
definitely redo
changed.
it. Yeah.
So, like another thing that needs to be rewritten is Steve. Like Steve totally
Oh,
needs to be
100%.
adjusted, and he can still be kind of like an annoying douchebag as a kid. But there's a modern way, just like how Moira I think is, and people have divisive feelings on how teenagers get portrayed. But I like Moira's portrayal, and I think
I love
Moira's
Moira. Yeah, I mean,
yeah
we talked about it, but yeah.
yeah I think Moira's a sample of what you could do to Steve, because Steve is put in like a compromising situation that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So I forgot to mention this earlier. Steve would actually be one of my least favorite characters. I forgot when we were talking about this. I totally forgot to
yeah,
mention Steve. And, we've talked about this in the past, but he, I think he could be portrayed as just less hateable, maybe,
yeah,
because he does have a kind of an interesting story. It turns out where like his dad turned into a zombie and he had to
hmm
kill him. Like that's pretty traumatic. And then he ends up turning himself and he kind of has this love thing for Claire. Like he has kind of a cool story and kind of a story where you could say, wow, I feel bad for this guy. Like I like this
yeah,
guy. But when I was playing Code Veronica, I found I didn't necessarily feel bad for him just because he was such a jerk and such an annoying character that I was
yeah,
just kind of like, whatever. I don't care. I don't like him. So
yeah,
I think I would portray him, yeah, as yeah, he's you don't need to portray him as an annoying teenager, as an annoying, hateable teenager. He could be a teenager and not be that. He could be, maybe at first a little rebellious, like he's not necessarily willing to work with Claire right away or stuff like that. He's kind of running away from her, not really cooperating at first. He could still have that
yeah,
because maybe he's afraid to trust somebody again. I think is
yep,
kind of the idea behind that. So he could still do that without being so annoying and so hateable to the point where it's just like I don't care about this guy anymore. So
yeah,
yeah, that he definitely, that would be one of my top things, is that they would need to rewrite that character, and I think they could do it. I don't think that would be terribly hard to rewrite because, like I said, the story for him being a good character is already there. If he could
yeah,
just be written slightly different.
yeah. And Carlos from Resident Evil 3 remake like is totally also a proof of concept that Capcom can totally rewrite a like toxic masculine character or it's like a super annoying previously dislikable character and actually make them into an
Hmm.
endearing character while still preserving that old like okay they're a little abrasive at first but actually they're decent people at heart. So
Yeah.
if you'll give me the moment, I actually really kind of constructed a
Ooh,
detailed intro for Code Veronica, a new intro
I'm ready.
in order to help. But yeah, for Steve, I realize some people hate his voice, but I kind
It
of
was
love
pretty
it because it's so cheesy. So that like I love it because it's so good. It's so bad it's good. So his voice is so good. It's so bad it's good for me.
Okay,
Also,
okay.
yeah, we need to make it more endearing, and totally we need to scrap like him like love confessing Claire at the end. We need to scrap
Yeah,
that like I love you Claire. Like no, that's dumb. That needs to go. I get what they were trying to go for, but it's too cheesy, it's too stupid and we can do better at this point. So you have to change that to when he's like dying, he's like thank you Claire. Like just thank you Claire
yeah,
is all we
something.
need. And like
Hmm.
him holding her hand because like when she's comforting him while he's dying, spoiler alert for people, but
Who haven't
you knew
played
what
this
you were getting
game?
into.
Yeah.
Hopefully you knew what you were getting into because she hates seeing people die, so she's like comforting him, and he does have enough of a tragic backstory for us to lean into to get that emotional reaction, but we have to build to it better. So like them holding hands and him being like, "Thank you," as he fades away. Like save that. Like that's how you save that scene. You take away where he tries to kiss her while she's sleeping because I believe as I've it's been described to me as that's borderline sexual assault. So that's terrible and that just needs to go. So you can have him like looking at her and being like smiling and smirking, just like wow. Like so you could
Yeah.
fix like take away the part where he tries to kiss her and just but you can have him showing like admiring her as like a person and being like huh,
Sure.
what a tough lady or something like that because that's that's what we see here and Claire holds up as a very tough confident person.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
here's what we do for the intro. I think we start out because we didn't get to see this in the previous game, so this will be really cool to see is before the island gets attacked and the outbreak happens. We'll follow Steve, give Steve his own little intro section that's a couple minutes long, where he's kind of going about on the island. He's in that prisoner. He's got his necklace on, the bomb choker or whatever that everyone had, and he's just kind of going through the daily motions of like being a prisoner there. There's people getting corded off. You hear ambient chatter. People like, oh, no, like Bob didn't come back last night. Yeah, they took him into the hole. You know what happens there, man. No one's coming back. The doctor got his hands on him, and he's like getting pushed around by some of the people. And it's like you just talking. You see this like very bleak situation of this like prison island that's basically a torture biological experiment island, and you just see
Hmm.
Steve kind of going through, and we get to start seeing a little bit here where for those who don't know, like, so what happened with Steve was actually his father worked for Umbrella. Then his father tried to sell Umbrella Company secrets out, and then Steve's dad got caught. So to punish him, they shipped Steve, his dad, and his mom to the island. They may have killed his mom right away. So that's immediately where Steve builds his resentment, is that like not only was his dad working for a shady company, but then he got caught, and then his mom died immediately, and so he was there with his dad. And that's why he like was super upset with his dad, because he blames his dad for getting them in it. I mean, it is his dad's fault really for getting them all caught up in it.
And that's kind of why he's hesitant to trust Claire too,
Exactly.
because of that whole situation. He has
It's like you
trust
can't
issues.
trust people.
Yeah.
Um, so we can see a little bit, start to get a little bit of environmental storytelling about that and why he hates his dad, and portray it more as like, instead of like this annoying angsty teen, he's just like, yeah, it's freaking, I don't even want to see my dad. Like, whatever. That guy's such a. You can just start to see his angst in his up and him. And I said angst again, but you just start to see his frustration with the fact that he knows he's trapped, and a little bit of fear, and maybe even he cries just a little bit, but like he's just because he's scared, and it's completely reasonable. And seeing people die, and he's just like, oh man, like, or like tortured, and it's like, oh man, I really wish I could make it out of it. And like maybe he has the family picture of his parents before everything passed, and he just goes, just glad you're not here, mom, to see all this. And that way it's like maybe he tries to tear his dad out of the photo, and so that like that's something we could see. And then it leads into the islands getting attacked, and like zombies start breaking out, and he's like, what the heck? And he like, you do like a quick run sequence, he's trying to hide, get away, maybe he fights off the zombies a little bit. He doesn't really get a weapon, but the game where we find Steve, he's up in that tower, so maybe that leads
Yeah,
to
he
like,
is that, right.
it leads to like, where can I hide? It's like, oh, the turrets, they're using the turrets. And then the guy, like, I have to wait for the guy to leave his post and something, and that's where we kind of like leave Steve in like a cliffhanger
Hmm.
type scenario. Then we cut over to Claire, who's over at the Umbrella Europe base, and so she's trying to sneak in, and so we play as her kind of like sneaking in. I don't want these sections to be too long, because at the same time it's not like the core gameplay, and even for me, like the Resident Evil 7 intro is so long and just
It
so
is.
boring. Like the
That's
first
true.
two times you play it, it's fine. But then like the Mia fight, and you're like underpowered, and it's so like, I actually hated
Okay.
having to go through that Mia fight, especially when I played through on hard mode. It's like
Yeah.
borderline like unbearable. Because they give you so much less ammo. She does so much more damage. You have like so fewer health items, and if you die, like there's like the checkpoint, it's just far enough away, and you have to get through all that to get to like the meat of the game. So I don't want these scenes to be too long, but just a good clip. And I would even put in a feature where like you can skip these after you've beaten the game for New Game Plus, so you don't have to, because there's nothing like special in there that you can do. It's just mood setting.
Yeah.
So, and for Resident Evil 7, I actually ended up going through and I made save files for like, okay, this is my baseline save file here, so I can always reload this and skip the intros,
It's a good
so I
idea.
never have to replay the Mia intro again, so I can just get into the main game um, when I did my replays. So, anyways, then Claire's trying to sneak into the base, and maybe she like goes to the counter, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I have like an appointment. I'm here for an interview." She's like, "Oh okay, which department?" It's like accounting or something like that. And she's like trying to sneak in, and then she like sneaks away in the lobby, and she's trying to get in, and then they find out like she trips an alarm. She's like, "Oh crap!" And so she tries and runs and hides, and there's a few things, and then there's like armed guards. She hears over soldier radios like, yeah, we've identified. It's Chris Redfield's sister. She's in the building. Like, detain her. Do
Now, would any
cap.
of this part be playable?
Oh yeah,
Would there
totally.
be? Okay, okay. I
You'd
wasn't
like
sure if it would
walk
just be
up and,
strictly cutscene or
oh no,
if
both are totally playable, but they'd be
okay,
like very
okay.
scripted, kind of like how the
Yeah.
or like think about it, even like the Resident Evil 2 intro at the gas station.
Yeah, like remake two. Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
just gonna say. Yeah.
we
Okay.
we
Yep.
there wouldn't be really real combat though. Like I wouldn't be against having like a new mechanic and introducing like a shoving mechanic, because I think that's fine. Like Resident Evil 2 had the defensive weapon system, and then Resident Evil 3 remake does have some sort of like resisting system, so you can reduce the amount of damage you take. So something like that, like an active shoving system, like proper timing, because that's something I think
Hmm.
at this point is fine. Like if you're being attacked by a monster, you should be able to push them off a little bit, and maybe it drains a
Oh,
little bit of
absolutely.
stamina or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that would be the introduction to that because it's not really combat focused. Like you're getting into
Okay.
the problem, so I don't want it to be like too much active combat and stealth. And I know people have different feelings about stealth, so it's more like just a tone setter. So
Okay.
Claire like it walks up to the desk. You're playing that. You walk her sneaking away. You're walking through the halls and you're hearing like you can stop and listen to the different people talking about the business and Umbrella, and you hear some like weird stuff and some normal office stuff and some weird stuff. So there's fun ambient dialogue. And then when things start going down, like you hear the buzzer going, and it's like, oh, Claire will guide you with voice commands. Like she's like, oh crap, like there's an alarm going off. I hope that doesn't have anything to do with me. And then like she's maybe about to round a corner and there's some yep, there's an intruder in building. Redfield, Chris Redfield's sister. Did you want her, Captain? Did you want her dead or alive? Okay, all right, take care of it. And like you see them arm their weapons and stuff like that. And she's like, oh no. And so she like has to duck into a closet, and then you trying to run into just a small stealth section, and then that's when I think his name's Rodrigo, that the prison guard and the guy who pulls
Yeah.
the gun
Okay.
on
Yeah.
after
The
the
guy at the very
bomb thing.
beginning. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
like she tries to get away, but then it's like you bump into Rodrigo and he's like, Claire Redfield, we got to take you in. And that's when it like fades out and that it's Rodrigo because he's kind of a good guy from the thing. So
Yeah.
you're lucky that he captured her and it's like got to take you in. And it's like maybe he has like one more extra line as she's like blacking out from being detained or like they stick her with a or it's like, oh miss, look, can I help somebody like sticks her with a sedative and it's
Okay.
like no, just ship her off to the I forget what the Ashford Island is like. Yeah, should just
Hmm.
ship her there because they'll want to. I hear they want to experiment on any. They're interested in any Raccoon City survivors. So that's like what it is, and that's kind of the excuse of why they leave her alive.
Okay. That's cool.
Then we go into the classic part, the actual first part of Resident Evil Code Veronica, where you wake up in the cell and Rodrigo's there and
Hmm.
like everything's gone to hell and he's like letting Claire out, and that's where we pick up from there and go on. So then everything kind of plays out normally from there, plus the additions to Claire and of course Wesker and stuff like that. So that's how I feel about the intro. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. That's super in depth. I like the idea of having a little intro with Steve because that kind of fixes what we talked about before
Hmm?
of helping Steve's character. You get that immediate characterization, and right from that beginning, you would kind of feel for him. You'd be like, oh, you can kind of get behind this guy. So I like that. I like what you mentioned. The reason why I asked if it was just going to be full cutscene or playable, I like what you said, how kind of similar to the intro of Remake 2, because I think that helps it to make it a little bit less boring because
Yep.
it's a cutscene, but you could do a little bit as well, so you don't just have to sit there and watch it. So
Yep.
yeah, I think that's a good one. I think it gives you, I think it would give a little bit more perspective on where you're at in the game and like where the story's going. Instead of it wouldn't feel random. It would feel like once you actually finally start the gameplay and get going, you would have a full kind of backstory already that you went through. So yeah, I think that's great. That's really in depth. I like it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's really important. And like I said, like you're gonna have two sequences that I think are just about as long as the one Resident Evil 2 remake intro sequence, and because you'd have that section with Steve, that'd be the first one, and then you'd have Claire, and that way we have tone setter for the island. Then we jump back to Claire and see what she's doing. Then Claire gets brought to the island, and I think that works out well. And I think that's the target length is how long the Resident Evil 2 intro is, and I'm counting both the time at the gas station and then the quick running through the streets into the police station there. Plus, I guess you can count this as like an intro, but once you're in the police station, you're kind of really playing Resident Evil, you know.
Yeah. Right.
But
Oh yeah. Sure.
so something about that's only like maybe 10 minutes each or 10 to 15. I guess it's tough to say until you actually start playing. And of course, people might take their time and explore a little bit more, so it'll take a bit longer. But I don't want it to be like if you crit path it, it's not too long, so people don't feel like it's dragging because pacing
Yeah.
is very important.
Yeah, you don't want it to be cumbersome to the point where people are like, I got to do this.
Yeah. Also for being conscious for speedrunners, because speedrunners
Sure.
will want to speedrun this game. So, did you have any gameplay aspects you wanted to talk about before I go on to my next point?
Well, I just have a couple of story things I want,
Sure, go
and
ahead.
they're
Yeah.
they're actually based on 2 points that you brought up today. So, in addition to what we mentioned as far as expanding on Steve and making him a better character, you mentioned this earlier, and I think I'd like to see a little bit more interaction between Chris and Claire. Like you talked about earlier, we don't get a ton of interaction with them. This is the only game where we really do. I mean, they're not in any other game together. And I think it could help to make Chris a more likable character, like we
Yep.
talked about earlier, that neither of us have really felt that connection with him. And I think if we got some more scenes with them together, where maybe they were fighting together, maybe he has to save her a couple times, or he kind of shows that like older brother. Because like you talked about, we see in Resident Evil 2, we get to see Claire as that like older sister kind of character to Sherry, where she's
Hmm.
like protective of Sherry and she feel, and then in Revelations 2, again we see that like older sister kind of figure where she's protective of Moira and she's being kind of the leader. We never see that really with Chris as much. Like we get that way more from Claire
Yeah.
than we do with Chris, which is going back to our what we talked about earlier, which is why I like her so much as a character and why I never connected with him as a character. So I'd like to see that more. I'd like to get some good interaction between them, some kind of nice sibling interaction. So that, and then the second thing with what you just talked about, this reminded me. I think it would be cool to get a little bit more on Rodrigo, because he is another one of those kind of in between characters where like he's a bad guy, he works for Umbrella, whatever, but he also clearly has some heart. Like he lets Claire go and all that stuff, and then you feel kind of bad for him because he's infected, and Claire goes and tries to save him and all that stuff. I think it would be cool to get a little bit more scenes with him. Like obviously you wouldn't want to make him like a main character or make him survive for super long, but I think it would be cool to get a little bit more time with him to maybe find out a little bit more of his story. And basically I'd like to have him in a little bit more than just like the opening scene and then
Yeah.
like the scene where she comes back with the serum but it's too late or whatever. I think it would be cool to get a little bit more on him. So not too much. He doesn't need to be a main character, a playable character, or anything like that, but I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more. I always kind of like those conflicted characters who are maybe evil but have good inside of them.
Yeah, I like both those points, and I'm going to expand a little bit because I think I'm going to coin a new term here. For Rodrigo, we can do like Resident Evil 2 remake. We can Marvinize him, like how they
Ah,
expanded
yes.
Marvin from this bit character in the original and actually made
Hmm.
him like he was slightly more recurring, and you got like these great emotional exchanges with him, and you kind of really cared about him, and it builds up to when he turns into a zombie, and you're like, oh man, no. And for people who played the original, they know Marvin's doomed, but you
Yeah.
suddenly like you talk to him and you see like it's like oh you get this start to you understand him now as a person, and it makes the game so much better. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think so that's what we could do with Rodrigo. Maybe he comes up a few more times with Claire, because Claire goes back and there's the one little side quest you can do, which is you can bring him back the medicine, and then that
Yeah.
medicine allows him to help Chris in Act 2, I guess it would be called. I
Hmm.
think if you do that instead of him like dying sooner. But yeah, that's what you could do is like maybe that you make that a mandatory quest where Claire goes back and she gives Rodrigo the medicine. Then Rodrigo, because of that, he helps her out with a few parts of the base. So this would also be like restructuring the game, which, that kind of happened in Resident Evil 2 Remake where they restructured a bunch of puzzles and
Oh yeah,
fleshed out
definitely.
the police station. So I
Hmm.
agree with you there, and the same thing. So I guess you'd have like Act 1, which would be Claire's section, and which would be the island plus the first part of the Antarctic base. And then you'd have Chris' section, which would be Act Two, which he has, the base, then it goes to the Antarctic, it has the island, then the Antarctic base. And then we have Act Three, and I think we could completely restructure Act Three to be a little bit longer. Now, Code Veronica is already a super long game
Yeah.
in comparison to Resident Evil games, but I think I agree with you. Like Act Three, we could restructure that so after Chris finds Claire and rescues her, and then we extend that outro a little bit, and we have to do like one more section in that mansion, which is kind of like a recreation, and you switch between Claire and Leon, Claire and Chris, and they work together to get out of that section before you do the combination fight with, or it's not even a combination fight, before you do the final fight against Alexia, which also needs a huge revamping. But regardless, so yeah, I agree. I think we could do it where they work together a little bit, and we won't. I wouldn't want it to be like Code Veronica style where you control the two, but they could walk together and talk together, like kind of the way Mia and Ethan interact in Resident Evil 7 for a little bit, and give them,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't think you need to have them where like one person plays as one person plays as the other. But yeah, like where maybe one follows the other, something like that.
or like they each get walkie talkies so they can like check in and talk, and for a little bit you
Hmm.
spend just a bit more time with them interacting and being like, huh, that's pretty crazy, huh? And Claire can ask them like, like, so Chris like can remark to Claire like, oh, they like recreated the Spencer Mansion. This is kind of weird, and they
Hmm.
can have some banter where Claire's like, oh yeah, kind of like a, so this giving you some real deja vu, and he's like, well, this has got to be giving you some deja vu for Raccoon City as well, doesn't it? And she's like, yeah, and she can give him maybe some, she could throw some sisterly crap at him about like, I had to come find you in in
You
Europe,
weren't even there.
and then he could be like, I didn't want you getting in trouble, and he'd be like, I tried like to tell like, oh yeah, I found your letter, and they could like toss back to Resident Evil 2 that fun letter you can find. I found your letter, very nicely encoded, buddy. Like you gotta, you're not, you're Mr. Secret Agent. Like they could do that, and it'd be so good. So I agree with you,
Hmm.
and I think you could make that work. So we just have to restructure Act 3, and you can
Yeah.
make that a little bit longer, and change all that up to make it more like, okay, there's a little bit more of the mansion here from the Spencer Mansion, and it could be taken from remake one instead of how it was almost a one for one recreation of Resident Evil 1, the with like the one archway and these like really blank white walls and things.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I agree with you on that. Would be we could definitely do that. But so offshoot from that, two offshoots. I'm sorry because I'm thinking more about this. Would you want to have those break up in betweens like they did in the previous game, where you play as Steve for a little bit, and also like we break from Claire and we start playing as Chris, but it's like one campaign? Or do you think like structurally maybe we should like, okay, you play as Claire the entire way and you see her entire side, then that unlocks Chris's thing, you unlock Chris's and you play through all that. And then there's also the Steve side stories, because we can play as Steve trying to survive on the island, and also when he runs away from Claire, we can have all that, and he like, and when you're playing as Claire's thing, you just see him run off, and you play as Claire for a little bit more, and then you run back into him, and that way it kind of breaks it up a little bit more. So like these are separate campaigns, or do you think it should still be interconnected as one big long stream thing, like the way it was in the original Code Veronica?
I guess I wouldn't. It wouldn't matter either way to me. But if I had to pick one, I would prefer keeping it the way it is. I
Mm-hmm.
liked it only because in one you play the full story as Jill, and then you could do the same thing with Chris, which has slight differences here and there. And then in two, you could play with Leon or Claire, whoever you decide to start with, and then play through again with the other one, and that has more differences. I like that they had it where it was all like one story where you start with
Mm-hmm.
Claire and then you kind
Yeah.
of you play a little bit of Steve, you continue with Chris in that the same story though. So yeah, I liked it. I don't think I would change that. If it was changed, I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't care. But yeah, I think I would keep it the way it is. I liked that. I liked what they did with that.
Okay. And I don't mind the Resident Evil campaign being longer, but it is something where like playing Resident Evil 2's campaign length for a character I feel is like nearly the perfect length, but I wouldn't even mind a
Hmm.
little bit more because I feel like the mansion, or not the mansion, the police station, then you expand into the parking garage and then a little bit outside.
Yeah.
Now you don't really go once you're outside and go into the start going to the sewers, you don't well you do come back. But I do like how it interconnects there.
Yeah, you get the whatever the club key, whatever the last one is. I forget. Isn't the
No, you get the
sewers? I
elevator,
think.
you find that secret elevator
Oh, okay.
and it leads
Wait, what?
back from the sewers.
Right, right. Okay, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, there's that, and then that interconnects, and it's like, oh, everything's kind of there, but you take a break and we move. I think the sewers in Resident Evil 2 are still too small. Like it's great that they expanded, but it also feels way too like linear. I think that's when it really
Mm.
starts like funneling you and doesn't give you that freedom that you kind of had with the police station.
Hmm.
So yeah, balancing the length, and that's there's smarter people than us that'll figure that out. But it would be, I wouldn't mind it if it was like if like the full playthrough takes about 15 hours to get
Okay.
through, and then like a speed run would be closer to like 5, which I think is also where it like gets to. I think it's like 2 or 3 maybe with like a really tight speed run for Code Veronica X. I have to double check, but yeah, I wouldn't mind it being still like a decent romp for that game because I like that. But it's more I want the certain aspects of the game. So like with Claire on the island in that first part, I really want them to tighten up the layout of it because I like, and I think I expressed this in the previous episode. I really like the maze-like aspect and how you get familiar with the space and you spend time and you're like you find these doors you can't open or these pathways you can't get to and you're like, oh, how am I gonna get there? Like, and you get like you feel like you know something's there, but you don't know how. And maybe some of it's a little optional, and maybe it's
Hmm.
some of it's so I won't want it like super open world, but I guess the best analog I can say to like what I appreciate is like with Dark Souls. What Dark Souls is a bunch of like hallways and interconnected interiors and stuff like that, and you just kind of slowly unlock your way through it. And Resident
Okay.
Evil is just that, but in a microcosm, much tighter and much smaller.
Yeah.
So I just want the island to, because you remember that first part, you wake up where the prison is, or the not the prison, but the jail cells, then the graveyard, and
Yep.
into the courtyard, which has that side area with the mess hall, the prisoner
Yeah.
barracks,
Yeah. That's right.
which leads off into the offshoot where you've got the metal detector sequence, which was dumb. But then there's also that side door you have to go to later to go into like the doctor's like secret torture chamber and things like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But that whole section is so like separated from like the main manor area,
Yeah. Right.
and but you still have to end up going back there because it's a while before you get the key and the blue plate to go and to open up the doctor section and go into that like back area. And that's a
Hmm.
and the way it
That
is
is
because
a
you have to go over the
huge. Yeah.
bridge. Like
I forgot. I forgot how big that game is. You're right. Yeah.
yeah. So I think they just kind of need to design it in like a circle. So like you start at this one part of the circle, but eventually you need a quicker way to get back to like the prison area and that doctor area for like after you've explored that. There wasn't a back way to it. It was always like you go
Right. Right.
through the tunnel and then you come back. And I think that's where the design fell apart for some of the backtracking because Resident Evil has tons of
Hmm.
backtracking, but
Of course.
it's about not making things too. Code Veronica did have some respawning enemies to help to help keep things lively, but
Yeah.
people
You
also
get
get
like the
frustrated with that.
hunters. I think after a while.
Yeah, but even before that, like some zombies will like respawn, or they have those
Hmm.
crawlers or whatever the
Yes.
Bandersnatches.
This. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
I hated those. Those are. I mean, I hated them in a good
yeah,
way. I thought they were good enemies, but they were a pain.
yeah. So I think creating like some more smart interconnected pathways between those different areas and kind of tightening it up a little bit will be helpful, and that's like the main goal of that. But I do want it to still feel like you're exploring this more interconnected space on this island, and it's okay if the island's both a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller. Well, it'll feel smaller because interconnected, but I think that's necessary. You need to be able to unlock some shortcuts.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I agree. Because the other Resident Evil games kind of have that where like
Right.
you get kind of far off track, but then you find some sort of back way into the place that now like now I could just use that to go back and forth instead of having to
Yep.
go all the way back around.
Yeah. And then a
One
lot.
thing. Oh no, go
Go
ahead.
on. No, no,
I
no.
was going to change. I was going to change topics, so you
Oh,
could
okay.
keep going.
So yeah, let me finish up on the like just the layout of the islands. So yeah, then the Antarctic base, same thing. Like actually, Antarctic base is not bad. It's more like a mansion style thing, but it's like a lab. I think it's pretty good. I like most of it. I think they can fix a few, maybe add a few rooms there to just kind of flesh it out a little bit, and that does lead to another point. And then what I want is for when it comes to Chris, when the island like kind of self-destructs and stuff, I want there to be some new areas, like some significantly different pathways between them with
Hmm.
a few familiar spots. And they did kind of do this, but it still was like too much the same on
Yeah, it was.
retrospect. Where like maybe some rooms are completely inaccessible, and there are a few new areas that open up for Chris, but it should be like he doesn't go to the exact same areas. They should, and Resident Evil 2 I accuse this of between the A and B playthroughs where it's way too similar
Big
between
time.
Claire and Leon. And this is where they should take the time, take the money, take the budget, and be like, okay, the area's destroyed. We recycle a few rooms, and we turn rooms into hallways for a couple things, and unlock these new areas that weren't previously accessible because they were secret. Because clearly this is a secret base with tons of crazy stuff to it.
Hmm.
And then when you get to the Antarctic base, because that's supposed to like flood, so that same thing. You should have to. It should expose like one or two new rooms, or not just one or two, but a couple new rooms and a couple new paths that Chris has to take because you can't get into older sections, and just differ it up a little bit more and take the time to actually make those two playthroughs feel like significantly different. And of course, like before, it
Yeah,
was supposed to be like when you're playing as Chris, eventually you unlock that third part, which is the mansion area, and that's where it's supposed to get both the closing act, but also really different. But we already talked about like restructuring that. So and also see some new areas. So maybe like as Steve for his sections, you see some of these areas you can't get into until you're like Chris, and you just get like glimpses of them,
oh, that would
and
be cool. Yeah,
and then that's like the tease there. So then with Chris like some of these areas are now unlocked and you'll get in there.
that would be pretty sweet.
And then the last point I'll say, because I don't want it to be like an open world game, but I do want there to be some more exploration and actually control. The Remedy's game control is actually very reminiscent of feels like oh this is like a super Resident Evil mansion. Now it's a very actiony gameplay, so in that regard it's not the same, but it does feel like there's enough space and nooks and crannies to explore with control that I feel like oh if they could make like a Resident Evil size or if they could make a Resident Evil game with like this kind of space, this would feel super cool to explore and like that
Hmm.
slower paced type of feeling, more claustrophobic feeling of Resident Evil. I do want them though with like puzzles because they could pretty much translate all the puzzles over. But I would like this little extra thing, and I'd love to see a game kind of do this. And I don't really think Resident Evil does this, at least not too directly. Is I'd love for there to be a couple secrets that are like from solving a puzzle the wrong way, quote unquote.
Ooh, okay.
Like you punch in a key code. And sometimes there's this, like if you pay attention there, I think there's like one or two examples in Resident Evil where it's like if you do a different code or something, you unlock like some extra ammo or things like that. But
Hmm.
that's what I'd like. Like maybe there's one or two rooms you really can't get into that are not plot oriented. They're just optional. And there are a few like optional like type objectives in Resident Evil, and there's a lot of stuff that becomes optional if you're trying to speedrun it. Um, but yeah, I would love a few of the puzzles to be like you can solve this in an alternate way that's not super clear and you kind of got to figure it out. And you will unlock like a secret compartment and you get like maybe a gun upgrade,
That's cool.
or
Yeah,
you unlock another room and you get a few more items, or you get some extra lore and logs and stuff like that. That's just a few secrets tucked away where if you it's a puzzle you will have to solve, and if you solve it the right way, you progress like normal. But there's also an alternate way that when you find the answer, like a keypad, you can punch in this keypad, and instead of it deactivating, you can go back and you can type in new numbers and see what happens.
that's a cool idea.
Or like one of the like shape puzzles, or like a weird, some type of other esoteric puzzle that just shows like you can solve it in a that could be solved in like a different alternate way that ends up leading to a secret. And I think that would be really cool to have because that would add some more of the replay value for people who are not necessarily speedrunning but just like to go through and are trying to really suss out. And I think it really fits for Resident Evil considering how mysterious and weird and eccentric all those background villains are.
Yeah, yeah. I love that idea. I think that's really cool. It's a
Yeah.
cool concept.
And maybe that would be a better way to tie in some of like Resident Evil's like replay upgrades is like you can unlock infinite ammo or you can unlock like a special weapon and things like that. Maybe that would be a better, or not a better, but a cool alternate way of doing that instead of like forcing like these are the rewards you get for beating the game in a certain time frame or in the grade. It's more like okay, well if you find these secrets then you also permanently unlock these upgrades as well. And I think they could add in some of that stuff and that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
definitely.
yeah, that reminds me. It's like in original Resident Evil 2. Remember how you got the costume key from from Zombie Brad?
Yeah, if you were able to fight him or find him or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way to do that was you you ran to the police station without picking up any items,
Right.
and then his zombie would spawn. And he was a super
In
tough
the
zombie, but
he was
yeah,
like under the stairs, right, in that
exactly.
outside area. Yep. Yeah.
Yep. So something like that. I would love to see some more of those kind of weird little secrets
Yeah, I
that
agree.
that also because of the dynamic difficulty, like I had a pipe dream of like in Resident Evil 2, there's a secret room somewhere where if you ever actually ran out of all your ammo and couldn't get to a pickup like before this point, there's like this secret room you'd get be able to get this key. It would open up a secret room in this one spot that normally there's nothing else here, and you could go in and there'd be extra ammo waiting for you there. Like something cool like that would be. I want to see more of that in Resident Evil.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So was there another point you wanted to touch on with remake? Because I do have a few more, but we're
Not really.
yeah.
I pretty much you covered most everything. I mean,
Okay.
I brought up a couple points. I just wanted to say that the reason I was going to change subject because this doesn't have anything to do with something I want to change, but
Sure.
I think it would be really cool to see an upgraded graphics, higher level graphics version of
Absolutely.
the part where remember the part where you're going to the mansion for the first time and you just there's like they kind of like pan out and you just see this like view, like big view of the mansion, and you just hear like the creepy laugh.
Oh
um
yeah, yeah.
that part, I don't
Mhm.
know why, but that part really creeped me out. I just
Mhm.
remember I was like, I don't want to go to this mansion. Like that part like creeped me out so much. I would love to see like a modern, I would love them to keep that in, but with like a modernized graphics updated version. I don't know why, I just that came to my mind. I just that part I remember just that, I think it was something about the laugh with like the mansion in the background. I think
Mhm.
they had like lightning going off, and I was
Yep.
just super creeped out by it. So
200% agree. Yep. Yep. I
but
agree with
yeah,
you.
that's about it for me. As far as I don't really have anything else I would want to see changed other than what I already mentioned and what you already
Okay.
said.
And these last few points are just kind of some of the gameplay mechanical stuff. It'd be and they're kind of bullet points, so we'll probably be able to plow through these quick. First off, inventory system. Do you want it, or what would you prefer? Do you want to see it like Resident Evil 2 style, where you can actually get like a bunch of slots, or would you like to go back a little more to a bit more restricted style?
Um, Call me old school, but I'm all about the restricted style.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just makes it a little bit more challenging and a little like you have to think a little bit more. So again, with kind of similar to the point you brought up earlier, I wouldn't hate either one. I'd be okay with either one, but yeah, I like the more restrictive method just for the point of strategy, I guess.
Yeah, I think it adds a little bit to it, and there's still flexibility I want to add to Resident Evil in lieu of having that as well. But I do like sort of that push and pull or friction, as I like to say, for dealing with the inventory management. Yeah, I think the attaché case thing that they do for Resident Evil 4 is too far. I
Oh yeah,
understand it
yeah.
was novel at the time, but I think for Resident Evil proper, that's too much. Resident Evil 8's apparently going to do that too, so I'm not super happy about that. But at the same time, I'm not.
Mm.
I don't. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I'll take it because it works. It is like a completely functional system and organizing. Like I do like organizing the things. I do get
Yeah.
joy out of that. So it's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it is a very actiony thing, and it's like especially when they like put like key items and stuff away. So you're not really you're just like, oh man, I can't carry all the ammo. Instead, it's just like, yeah. So I would like to keep it tighter, but I think like maybe because like I think Resident Evil 2 maxed out at like 20 slots. So
Can't
maybe
remember. Yeah.
yeah. So I think you started with 8 slots as Claire, and then you could expand it to 10, and you do expand it to 10 pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and I always like the idea of I think they started this in two. I can't remember if they did it in one. Maybe they did, and I'm just forgetting. But I like the idea of getting like, a backpack that holds more items. Like you
mhm,
start with 6 slots, and then it's like, oh, you found this backpack. You get 2 extra slots or 4 extra slots or whatever it
yeah.
might be. I always like that. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it started in 2 because in number 1 it was just you could either play as Jill who had 8 slots, or you played as
That's right.
Chris and he
Yep.
had 6 slots.
Okay. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't upgrade. They didn't change at all. Yeah, I think maybe to still kind of allow for the modern thing, you start out with like maybe 8 slots and you could expand to 14, two at a
Mhm.
time. So you go like 10, 12, 14. So there's like 3 upgrades you could find there, I think, or even 16,
Okay.
it's whatever. I want
Yeah.
them to get rid of the two. I just want this to be gone. Make no items be more than 2 slots,
I could not agree more. Yes,
or
100%.
don't make items more than 1 slot. Everything should just be 1 slot. Like
Yeah.
just do that.
I
Uh,
agree. As as much as I like strategy and like trying to be like, oh, could I carry this, but I can't carry this. It's super annoying when you get like, whatever the bazooka,
yeah,
let's say, or something, and it takes up like 2 or 3 slots. It's
yeah,
like, okay, like come on, like yeah,
yeah.
I definitely agree with that.
And I get like that's partially why like well we that's why we gave you so much extra slots so we could have both the best of both worlds. But like no,
Yeah,
just
and I
just
mean, I guess they're trying to make it realistic because
quote
in
unquote yeah.
yeah, because a bazooka, let's say, would take up, or a grenade launcher, or whatever you want to call it, would take up
Yeah,
more space in your backpack than a handgun. But still, it's just there's a point where
yeah. And
you
I
want things to be realistic, but at the same time, you want things to be not frustrating. I guess I don't
yeah.
know. Yeah, I was never a big fan of the items taking up multiple slots.
Yeah, I would want to get rid of that. It was especially terrible in Zero. So get rid of that. Every item takes up 1 slot, and you could just change around stacks. So maybe like with ammo, like limit the bullet stacks to like 60 per. And I forget exactly how it worked in 2, because I think they did like something closer to that. I don't think you could carry more than like 60 like bullets per slot or something like that. I forget. It
Mhm.
changes per game too. But yeah, to tighten that up, like maybe make it so you can't carry too much ammo at once, because you should be picking up some more along the way. But lower the stacks. I think with health items for herbs, like the like single green, single red, single blue, etc. If we use all the herbs, have it so that like maybe you can stack up to 3 of the single herbs. But then like the mixes, like red and green and stuff like that, that is a single slot and that doesn't stack. Like that's fine. Like you could play with that because you need to put all the key items there. You need to put your weapons there, and you need to pick your ammo, and you need to balance that stuff. So that's where I think it would make more sense to do 1 slot per, and then you just kind of tighten up the stacks, and you have like the key items and things like that. Also, I want them to just finally do this because it's dumb that they split it up. Is how in Resident Evil Zero you could put items down and pick them up, and that's what they did instead of item boxes. But that took away the convenience of the item boxes with
Mhm.
being able to take things to new areas, and you'd have to do extra backtracking. That's super annoying.
Yes, yeah, that's super annoying.
Yeah. So what they should do is, and they've had some of these quality of life features, so they just need to put all of them together.
Yep.
A, have the set item boxes in spaces. That's fine. B, allow people to put down and drop items and put a location on the map. It's not a technological limitation anymore. They can totally do it. And
Best of both worlds.
best of both worlds. Also, A, you can pick up, mix, and combine herbs on. You can either use or combine herbs on pickup in case your like inventory is full or something like that. Yeah, because you can do that a little bit, and especially in Resident Evil 2, like you could pick up and combine key items as well if it was an key item that could be combined on pickup. So that's good. But yeah, you should also be able to use it. Like if you pick up a green herb and you should just be able to use it right away. And they've had this feature in other games, so it's not like they haven't done these things, but they should
it's
just have them
funny.
all at once.
It's funny you mentioned Zero about just dropping the items and picking them
Mm-hmm.
up, but they got rid of the item boxes because when we were playing Zero, like the part when you're in the mansion area, we
Mm-hmm.
pretty much we decided just to, when we were dropping items, we had a room that we would just drop all of our items in because we
Yep,
were really
exactly,
getting sick of it. So it was kind of like a save box, except it didn't. It was the
exactly.
only area that it was in, but because yeah, we were just getting so annoyed. Like we've got stuff all over the place. There's things over here, things over here. So we were
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, from now on, anytime we're dropping stuff, we're putting here. So we just had this one room with all of this, all of
Yep,
these
I did
items
the
in
exact
there.
same.
So yeah, it kind of defeated the purpose, I guess. Like at that point, you might as
Yeah,
well have a save box. So yeah, I agree. At this point, we're in PS5 era. We don't need to have one or the other. Let's have both.
yeah.
Let's do it. Best of both worlds.
And if it, because I know there can be some bug testing, because in Zero the items actually like appeared on the ground, and so they all looked like they're distinct items, so they had to program that, and then there was issues where you couldn't pick up the right item because they stack over each other, etc. So I'd also be willing to make like a compromise is once you pick up the item when it's being set back down, like you can see what it is on the map, but when you set it back down, maybe they have just a generic item model that's like
Hmm.
a box or a little box or some sort of generic Resident Evil looking thing that is what they put down, so it's always something they can count on. So it's no matter what, you put down a gun, you put down gun, you put down ammo, you put down health. Instead of rendering out each model on the ground, it's just like these boxes that they could easily whatever will make it easier for bug testing. I just want the feature there. I just want all the features there.
Yeah,
And if they have to make some compromises on the design aspect, but it functionally works out great, that they
that's
should do that.
reasonable.
Oh,
Yeah.
also one they haven't done this would be, and I don't think even Zero had it, I'm not sure, is swapping. Like also swap on pickup. If you need to, it's like, oh, I need to pick up this key item, but I guess if I need this key item, I can put away this health item, or I can put this ammo down just so I can carry the item till I figure out what I need to
Oh
do.
yeah.
Swap on pickup. Allow you to be
Yeah,
like,
I hate
you're
when
in,
you can't. It's like you're too full and you have to put that down, then pick up the other thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now I get it that they would be like, well, but you could drop the item if you can't. Then I get it. Maybe it does, and maybe I sound like a hypocrite with bug testing, but it's one of those things where you should make it as few steps as possible for the user and figure out how to be able to be like, okay, well, oh, my inventory's full. Instead of making me back out, back away, drop an item, and then go pick it up, then just let me
Definitely.
swap on pickup, and then that item just appears on the floor. Just have that a one-step process right when the transaction's happening.
That
So
would save a lot of frustration. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just a quality of life thing that smooths it over. It's a good extra step. They can do it. Resident Evil makes money. They should do it. Like they should put the time and budget in, and once you build it once, then you can have it and you can move that over from place to place. At least,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not a programmer, so maybe it doesn't work like that, but I'd hope it does, or it makes it a lot simpler to do those things in the future. So quality of life when it comes to inventory and picking up items, smaller inventory slots overall and smaller stacks if that's what it means. So that's for inventory. Pretty much all the weapons are cool. I like all the weapons that are in Code Veronica. I would like there to be more ammo for the firebow bolts. I
Oh
like
yeah.
I would like there to be a little bit more of that. Or
I love those. Yeah.
I don't think I want the weapon crafting, like, or not the weapon crafting, but yeah, weapon upgrades are fine. But the ammo crafting, I know they've put it in 2, they put it in 3. They brought
I'm
it
not a big
into 2, they
fan.
invented it in 3 and added there. I don't
Yeah.
yeah. I
I
do
don't
like
love it.
I don't hate it like the push and pull of the strategy to it, especially like in 7 where it's like the chemical could help you create health or ammo. So you're constantly choosing between, well, based on my playstyle, am I needing more
Right.
ammo or am I needing more health?
Health or something. Yeah, I guess I'm the same way as you. I could take it or leave it. I'm not the biggest fan, but I don't hate it. I guess it's not like a game breaker for me.
By the way, this is a secret. If I'm pretty sure there's a secret recipe in Resident Evil 7. I don't know if you knew about this, and I didn't find out about this till like a couple months ago. There's a secret recipe in 7 where it's like 10 handgun bullets plus a gunpowder will make more enhanced bullets.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I
Yeah,
knew that.
because normally you have to take gunpowder and the yellow chemical, and that makes
Yeah,
like
yeah.
10 handgun bullets or 10 enhanced handgun bullets. But you can also take 10 handgun bullets and then add gunpowder, and that gives you 5 enhanced handgun bullets.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
dude, that like
That's
totally
new.
changed the game for me because you like can't
Change
make
that.
enough like enhanced bullets in that game, and you get a ton of basic bullets if you scrounge. So I was like, holy crap, that like changes the game, and I do kind of like those little secret recipe things, but at the same
Hmm.
time, I don't know. I feel like what we could do there to have some fun is you could have them like what they do with the normal mode versus the hard mode in Resident Evil 7 and like Resident Evil 2 remake, where normal has like no ink ribbons. So like for Code Veronica remake, normal mode has no ink ribbons and no weapon crafting or no ammo
Hmm.
crafting, and then in hard mode you have ink ribbons, and then it introduces ammo crafting. So you can make like handgun bullets, shotgun bullets, magnum rounds, grenade rounds, and
Okay.
maybe like frag grenades and flash grenades. Like I do want and so yeah, I do want them to add like flash grenade and frag grenade. Not that necessarily they don't really. I guess they really don't need to, but that'd be cool. They can have defense items. I'm fine with defense items. I like that, but I also want like the
I
shove
like defense
mechanic.
items. Yeah. No,
I
no, I
would like,
agree.
yeah, I would
Yeah,
like a
like you
melee
said,
shove mechanic.
at this point, there's no reason not to have it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it could be like the dodge mechanic in 3, where you have to do with like a skill timing thing in order to make sure that in order to use it or abuse it.
Hmm.
So I'd want something like that. So they could also tighten up the ammo amount that you find in there, and then in hard mode, same thing. Like, and I don't want the end to be too much of a shooting gallery. That's the other thing. Like, I don't want it to build up. Like, well, you get you can still stockpile a decent amount of ammo, but when you get to the end game, you should feel like, even in normal mode, you should feel like, well, I have a good chunk of ammo, but I could still run out. And
You
I'm not saying,
shouldn't have like 100. Yeah, it's all
yeah,
kinds of extra ammo.
yeah, you shouldn't have 100. You should have like 50. You could have like 50, and you should still know you can like beat the final boss. And that's the thing where like with the bosses, it should be like they are bullet sponges if you don't know like the gimmick, but the gimmick is like kind of spelled out, not too bad, not just the weak point. There should be something else. I want it to be a little more creative, but it's like okay, if you can hit, and they have the dynamic difficulty thing, so they can make that all work. And that's the other part. They can lower the ammo and they can have the dynamic difficulty. So like if you're really a terrible shot or really messing around, then yeah, of course you're gonna die and you're gonna have to restart. But
Hmm.
if you are a good shot, if you're a decent shot, and you're at least trying to play by what the game wants you to do, you're able to beat the boss. You know, you might beat it within an inch of your life, but that's the fun part.
Yeah, I agree with everything. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. Of course, the I've talked about like I want the randomizer, so like on repeat playthroughs, it would be like a separate mode where they move around the locations of some key items, but not game breaking wise. Move around the
Definitely, that
locations.
would make a second playthrough a lot more fun.
Yeah, move around the ammo and health item spots and have different spots, not all the set spots where it's like, oh, well, you're always going to find an item in this spot that's like ammo or health, and then it just could be a different version of that. But no, it could be they should have like different spots also on the map that don't get used on a normal playthrough, but get used in that mode, and not just have those like cardboard boxes that you they're not even cardboard, but like those wooden boxes you break and
Yeah,
are random
yeah, yeah.
items. Yeah, I think I would definitely like to see that as a bonus mode for that. And also, I think I theorized about this before. I don't remember if we just talked about it privately or if I mentioned it on the previous episode as well. For Code Veronica specifically, I'd love a what if scenario where it's like, and it's not heavily cutscene based. Like you don't need like totally brand new cutscenes. It's just more gameplay focused. Where it's like you put Chris at the beginning of the game instead of Claire, and he kind of has to play through those aspects, and he finds Claire's weapons, and then it's as Claire you play through as though that area with Chris's gear and stuff. I think that'd just be kind of
Interesting.
neat to see like a swap there.
Yeah, that's different.
And it's a trimmed down mode for sure, but I think it'd still be kind of goofy if you're playing
Hmm.
with these two characters in different loadouts at the different parts of the story. And
Yeah.
maybe they each have
I,
like a different thing. Like Claire has the shove mechanic, and Chris has like a shove but he also has the defensive gear or something like that, and that you like change the
hmm.
mechanics between the two. So his like Claire's shove she can use more often or something like that, and where Chris he only gets like one shove, but he can use like once every 3 minutes or something like that, but it pushes them farther away, and he gets like Jill and yeah, kind of like how Jill and Carlos in Resident Evil 3 remake, they both have like this dodge slash quick time event mechanic but it just works differently for the two of them. Claire has like a dodge, or not Claire. Jill has a dodge that can turn into like a slow mo time shot, and
Hmm.
for Carlos, he turns it into like a shoulder check that punches the guys away. So do something like that between like Claire and Chris
Yeah, helps to
for Code Veronica.
differentiate a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So that yeah, that's about all my ideas for remaking Code Veronica at this time. And like we said,
I like it.
yeah, like Act Three, we'd extend, and so Chris and Claire could work together, and it'd be like a final little puzzle section, less of a shooting gallery. Give you a little more time with Alexia terrorizing the two of them, maybe a little bit more time with Wesker, and play within that. So yeah, I think that yeah, I think we got a good baseline. Capcom, call us.
Yeah, yeah. You got all kinds of stuff. I like it.
Okay then. So yeah, we pretty much talked about what we set out to talk about today. Was there any last bits you wanted to bring up before we say before we close off today?
No, we got really in depth. I think we covered just about everything. We talked a lot about the characters, all kinds of stuff with that, and we got really in depth with thoughts about potential Code Veronica remakes. So yeah, we covered everything I think that I could think of.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely talked about a ton, and there's still more. I know we could probably talk about Resident Evil for a few more hours and whatnot. Hopefully, we will do some more Resident Evil centric episodes once you've had a chance to play 3 remake and 4. Maybe that's what we'll plan for as well. Like, let me know if you play any of those. We'll obviously be in touch when the movie and the TV shows drop, and we'll talk about those. And of course,
Hmm.
Resident Evil 8 is on the horizon. So, yeah, we've got plenty. more to look forward to in the future to talk about for Resident Evil, and we'll
Absolutely.
deal with that as it comes. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today again, Paul, and chatting about Resident Evil.
Yeah, thank you. It's always fun to talk about Resident Evil. It's something that we could keep going on. I'm sure we went on long, long as it was, and I feel like we probably even have more to talk about. But
Heck yeah. And thank you to all our listeners out there who joined us today. I hope you had fun and we would love to hear in our comments, your ideas for Resident Evil remakes and what you think of the mechanics you want brought over and thoughts about that. Please be polite and yeah, um, everyone have a great day and take care till the next time.